Chapter 721. In the spring, if he planted a lot of corn, would he be able to harvest a lot in the autumn? Perhaps in the eyes of many people, sowing melons and getting melons, sowing beans, reaping what you sow, karma begets karma, hard work makes up for one's lack of talent, and it was best to fish for some reward. After Fan Xian came to Jingdou from Danzhou, he had worked his life out for the Qing court many times and brought a lot of good fortune to the people. Although he was not a righteous and benevolent person, he had, either automatically or consciously, planted a lot of good fortune. Unfortunately, by the autumn of the 10th year of the Qing calendar, no good fortune had come. All of his official positions had been taken away, and all of his power had been taken away. All of the family he cared about had become disguised hostages. He had become a commoner. He had become a wealthy man of leisure who could only listen to songs and wander around Baoyue brothel. No one dared to speak up for him, and no one dared to plead for him to His Majesty. All the officials and citizens just calmly watched the scene unfold. They even watched it calmly, showing kindness without asking for repayment. Did Fan Xian have this kind of mentality? No one knew. In people's eyes, Sir Fan Jr., no, the little duke, no, Fan Xian had perfectly played the role of a wealthy man of leisure since the autumn. All he did was stroll the streets and alleys of Jingdou, soak in Baoyue brothel, play with the children in the manor, gossip with the women in the family, and read the new novels published by Donbo Bookstore. The Donbo medical shop across the door from the bookstore was still open. The doctors of the Imperial Academy of Medicine were replacing Fan Ruoro in practicing medicine among the people. No one knew if this was the condition the icy woman in the palace had made to the emperor. In any case, the young lady of the Fan family remained deep in the palace. Fan Xian had no way of entering the palace to see her. He could only change his original idea and ask his wife to enter the palace many times to see. Just like this, a month passed peacefully. The Fan Manor was so quiet that it was almost forgotten by the people of Jingdou. Fan Xian was so silent that he was almost about to disappear in people's discussions. However, there was one place that could not forget Fan Xian. It was the Imperial College. Although the emperor's edict had taken away all of Fan Xian's official positions, he had thrown him an empty position as a teacher of the Imperial College. About 20 days ago, perhaps because it was too boring to be a wealthy idler in the manor, Fan Xian finally fought his way out of the land of gentleness and began to attend classes at the Imperial College. The Imperial College, surrounded by ancient trees, was as quiet and secluded as usual. The news that Fan Xian was coming to the Imperial College to teach stirred up the students. In the open space in front of the Qingxin Pond, one could often see hundreds of people gathered together and listening with great interest. Fan Xian's habit was to give lectures to these students at the stone steps in front of the Qingxin pool. Because there were too many students who came to listen to his lectures, the Imperial College could not arrange for all of them. They could only listen to his mischievous suggestion and place the class between heaven and earth. Some people couldn't help but think that perhaps Fan Xian just wanted to use the endless autumn rain to be able to talk less. The content of the class was actually very simple. It was mainly about the collections of histories and classics that the great northern Qi scholar, Sir Zhuang Mohan, had used his entire life's work to compile. The Qing Imperial College had used a number of years of effort and, with the great support of Donbo Bookstore, had long sorted through that carriage of books. Fan Xian was also relatively familiar with these books. When he spoke of the allusions in them, he did not need to have stage fright. Of course, Fan Xian's lectures were different. Basically, each time, he arranged for a few teachers to speak frankly and with assurance in front of the Qingxin pool. In the end, he would personally take the stage and debate with the students below the steps. As for the contents of the debate, because it was a bit disrespectful, it did not spread outside the Imperial College. Although Fan Xian was nothing right now, at least in the Imperial College and in the hearts of these young students, he was still a very remarkable figure. At least, he was a person with some special privileges. Fan Xian lazily ended the day's classes and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the red-faced and thick-necked students' unrelenting verbal attacks. Clapping his hands, he walked down the stone steps and said, "I told you a long time ago, I can basically only memorize the classics and classics. If you want me to say something profound and meaningful, I can't say it clearly. Although I understand the principle of sending troops with a good reason, how can there be such a thing as a righteous battle in this world? It's nothing more than an excuse. The Qin Kingdom's mighty army points its sword to the world. Naturally, it is for the sake of saving the people." The student brought a dozen friends and caught up to Fan Xian's butt. Very unconvinced, he said something. Today's topic touched on the period when the Wei Kingdom was founded. Using plain words, both sides were analyzing the problem of the righteousness of war. Yet, this problem was the one that Fan Xian could not explain clearly. He also believed that not many people in the world could explain it clearly. Fan Xian got into the carriage and left the Imperial College. He no longer paid attention to the students who were still angry and dissatisfied behind him. The carriage traveled for a while on the streets of Jingdou. It then escaped the liveliness of the Imperial College's silence and returned to the clear autumn scenery. He unconsciously pulled open the curtains and looked at the scenery outside with a smile. However, he could not hide the sliver of melancholy between his brows. He had been a wealthy and idle person for a month. This was only a superficial appearance. He just wanted to create an appearance for the court and the palace to see. In Fan Xian's heart, there had always been a fire that was the complete opposite of his outward calm and happiness. However, this fire had been suppressed very well by him. Furthermore, he was forced to suppress it because the situation at hand still did not give him any opportunity to take advantage of. After returning to Jingdou, Fan Xian had never returned to the Overwatch Council, particularly after he had completely exiled the members of the Qinian unit from the capital. Even contacting the First Bureau had become difficult. However, this did not mean that Fan Xian did not have other sources of information. He knew that in only a month, the Emperor had, with Yan Bingyun's valiant assistance, successfully suppressed most of the unstable elements in the Overwatch Council. The work of changing the blood was also progressing methodically. It was just a matter of when it would be completely cleaned out. The news from Jiangnan was also not very good. All of these signs were the source of Fan Xian's worry. He found that he had still underestimated the control and power of imperial power in a feudal society. Even the Overwatch Council that Chen Pingping and he had worked hard to run for decades was developing in a direction of submission under the coercion of imperial power. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The problem between him and the Emperor appeared to be in the Overwatch Council, the Palace Treasury, and Jingdou. In reality, it was under the heavens. All of the Qing court officials, the wise people among the people, and even Hu the scholar and Yan Bingyun, did not understand this. Thus, they did not understand why the Emperor would deal with Fan Xian like this. He had taken away all of Fan Xian's official positions and power, yet allowed Fan Xian to live freely in Jingdou and still maintain a secret influence. Fan Xian's present state was neither dead nor alive. Only he and the Emperor knew why this state was. If it was just to deal with Fan Xian alone, the Emperor was much stronger than him. Without any effort, he could knock Fan Xian into the dust and then step on him so that he would never be able to rise again. The problem was that outside Jingdou and even outside the Qin Kingdom's borders, Fan Xian's secret influence was terrifyingly powerful. Even with the Emperor's confidence and pride, he could not underestimate this level of valiance. Thus, the Emperor had Fan Xian stay in Jingdou, neither dead nor alive. Then, he slowly and steadily whittled away at Fan Xian's influence outside Jingdou. At the same time, he had to cut off Fan Xian's invisible hands that stretched outside the country's borders. This was a process of quantitative change leading to qualitative change. If he did not eliminate Fan Xian's influence to the point where the Qing court could bear the risk, the emperor would not actually kill him. Even if Fan Xian died, if Dongyi and Xiliang truly fell into chaos, the emperor would not want to see this scene. If the emperor could perfectly control these problems, then what was so important about Fan Xian's life or death? The carriage arrived at Baoyue brothel with familiarity. Fan Xian got off the carriage and entered the building with his hands behind his back. He walked directly toward the courtyard by the lake in the back. He didn't even glance at the figure at the end of the street behind him. The person watching Fan Xian was an ascetic monk. No one knew how many ascetic monks were watching him in secret. The problem was that ascetic monks could not get close to women. Fan Xian entered Baoyue brothel, so they couldn't follow. Passing through the slightly cool lake surface and the breeze, Fan Xian walked into the courtyard that had been set aside for him. Looking at the increasingly charming and beautiful brothel owner in front of him, he smiled and said, "What new songs do you have to listen to today?" Shi Qing covered her mouth and smiled. "Young master doesn't write poetry anymore. Where would there be any good songs for you to listen to?" It had already been a number of years since Fan Xian had searched the brothel. Yet, this Shi Qing woman did not show any signs of aging. Fan Xian looked at her with narrowed eyes and smiled. He didn't say anything more. In reality, there was no need for the spies of the internal court to keep an eye on him. Everyone in Jingdo knew that Sir Fan Jr. had long become a half-crippled rich man of leisure. His greatest pleasure was to come find the girls in Baoyue brothel. A rich man of leisure. Fan Xian truly lived up to this reputation. Although he had no official position or power, he still had money. No one knew exactly how much gold and silver was hidden in the Fan Manor. On the surface, the Baoyue brothel in the Fan Manor had long swallowed up most of the high-class brothels in the world with the strength of the Qing kingdom and the protection of the Overwatch Council these years. Under the rules and regulations Fan Xian had single-handedly made, Baoyue brothel had already opened all over the world. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it had already unified the brothel industry. Baoyue brothel's nominal owners and shopkeepers, Shi Chanli and Sang Wen, were still developing businesses in Dongyi. They had already extended their hands into northern Qi Shangjing. Everything was going smoothly. No matter where they were prominent figures. Of course, everyone knew that Fan Xian stood behind them. Fan Xian lay on the soft couch and contentedly accepted the two girls' massages. His eyes were closed, but his brain was spinning quickly. Baoyue brothel was, in the end, an industry. The court could not be too shameless about it. The palace also did not want to completely destroy the Fan Manor's reputation, so they had left Fan Xian such a comfortable place. What comforted him the most was that it was clear that the people of this era had, in the end, underestimated the usefulness of a brothel in terms of intelligence. A few years ago, Fan Xixia and the third prince, these two brats, were lawless and out of control. They had created a business that had now become one of Fan Xian's trump cards. What excuse did the court use for Su Wenmao's dismissal? Fan Xian asked with slightly lowered eyes after the courtyard had quieted down. As Fan Xian's trusted aide and a court official, Su Wenmao could not leave his post without permission. He could only wait helplessly for the court to act. Not long ago, an edict had been sent directly to the 3 large workshops in North Min to bring Su Wenmao back to the capital. This was originally a very secretive matter. Because of the existence of Baoyue brothel, Fan Xian knew about it earlier than most people in Jingdo. Because he had long been mentally prepared, Fan Xian was not shocked or angry. He only thought worriedly about whether the people the Qinian little group had sent to North Min had been explained clearly to Su Wenmao. He believed that Su Wenmao, a cheerful second in command, would not stupidly oppose the court head-on. However, He was worried that time was too tight and Su Wenmao would not be able to arrange enough people in the palace treasury. The palace treasury was Fan Xian's second route. The palace treasury transport company had already been completely taken over by the emperor, but Fan Xian would not allow this route to be directly cut off by the palace. If it was to be cut, it had to be done by Fan Xian. Furthermore, once the knife was cut down, it would make the Qing court feel bone-deep pain. Thinking of this, he thought of the heavily guarded 10-family village to the north of Dongyi, the 3 large workshops, the royal palace, and the one in his mind. A glimmer of a smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. The hands in his sleeves slowly tightened into fists. In Shiliang Road, Deng Ziyu had successfully escaped from the court's secret net. However, no one knew where he was hiding. Since there was no news of Deng Ziyu's death in the intelligence reports, Fan Xian felt very comforted. However, the members of the 4th Bureau were now without a leader. He didn't know if they could withstand the pressure from the Overwatch Council in Jingdou. The order Hong Yiqing had received was to first go into the grasslands to find that person and then come back to contact the powers in Dingzhou and Qingzhou. He hoped that everything would be in time. Gong Dian has already arrived in Dingzhou, Shi Qing said with her head lowered. Fan Xian was silent and speechless. He had indeed not thought that the emperor's reaction would be so fast. He had actually moved the commander of the imperial army directly to Dingzhou to hold down the fort. Although Li Hongqing had led troops in Dingzhou for a number of years, his foundations were still shallow. Gong Dian was also an old member of the Dingzhou army. His experience and contributions were there. Hongqing would probably not be able to withstand it and would be forced back to Jingdou. If he wanted to think of a way for Hongqing to remain in Dingzhou and control a portion of the military power that belonged to him, then he had to make Shiliang fall into chaos first. Fan Xian furrowed his brows tightly. He realized that everything had long left his control. He could only hope that the first group of people he sent to the grasslands would be able to quickly contact Hu Gu and have the Hu people on the grasslands go against the heavens and first launch an attack in this early winter. Things were too chaotic and complicated. How could Fan Xian truly be idle? He glanced at Shi Qing helplessly and asked, "How is the investigation of the Ministry of Works corruption case going?" Sir Yang. Shi Qing glanced at him worriedly. Yesterday, the case was decided. This afternoon, the Supreme Court will issue a clear verdict. Although she had once belonged to the second prince, under Fan Xian's coercion these years, she had long been unable to have second thoughts. Furthermore, as a woman from a brothel, she knew that the young man in front of her was faintly different from all the nobles in Jingdou. She wanted to be the second Sang Wen but not the second Yuan Mang. Thus, seeing Sir Fan Jr.'s right and left arms being torn off one by the court, she couldn't help but feel terrified and afraid. Fan Xian glanced at the light on the surface of the lake. He was silent for a moment and then said, "It's afternoon. I'll go get him." From the time the case of Yang Wanli, the Vice Minister of the River Department of the Ministry of Works, was reported to the time the case was handed from the Ministry of Justice to the Supreme Court had only taken a dozen days. This kind of efficiency was enough to make one sigh in admiration even in the history of the Qing kingdom. Those who didn't know the inside story would probably think that the emperor's edict to clean up the bureaucracy had suddenly become real in the Qing kingdom's 10 years. As for the true officials, when they saw this scene, they couldn't help but sigh and feel cold. Because they all knew what kind of person Yang Wanli was. He was a capable and honest official who had endured for 2 whole years on the embankment of the great river. Yang Wanli was one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. The silver that Sir Fan Jr. had privately raised had flowed like water through the river transport governor's yamen and into the riverbanks. It had all passed through his hands. If he had truly wanted to be greedy, it would not have been the few thousand liang of silver stated in the crime report. Instead of eating the fat meat, he was going to take the bribes from the Ministry of Works Yamen. Furthermore, all of the officials knew that Yang Wanli's family was very strict and treated his subordinates very leniently. Putting aside the Overwatch Council's salary that was many times that of court officials, just the 3 officials who held positions in the Qin Kingdom were actually supported by the Fan Manor every year. A mere few thousand liang of silver was not a difficult matter. Everyone knew that the Fan Manor was the foremost god of wealth in the world. How could Yang Wanli be greedy? It was precisely because they knew this that the officials knew that Yang Wanli's trial was only the palace's idea. Under the single-handedly arranged by Scholar He of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, the trial proceeded quickly. Today, the Supreme Court was going to pass judgment. According to some insider information, if the scholar had not taken pity on Yang Wanli's talent and forcefully interfered, Sir Yang's fate would probably have been even worse. Fan Xian stood alone in front of the door of the Supreme Court Yamen, alone and waiting for the result of the judgment inside. The bailiffs outside the Supreme Court Yamen had long recognized his identity and were frightened. They had long sent word to the people inside to know, but they could only stand trembling in front of Fan Xian. Fortunately, Fan Xian did not fly into a rage. He only waited silently for Yang Wanli to come out. The Yamen closest to the Supreme Court was the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. The little bastards of the First Bureau discovered that the director was here and couldn't resist standing outside the door of the Yamen, forcefully suppressing their excitement as they watched this scene. The First Bureau was Fan Xian's old nest. Back then, the rectification had created a group of loyal subordinates. Otherwise, there would not have been a large group of First Bureau officials escorting him out of the city when he made a scene at the execution field that day. Although Mu Tai had long been kicked out of the Overwatch Council, these officials still saw Fan Xian as the director and refused to accept Yan Bingyun. However, the Qin law and the council were strict. These officials could only watch the lonely Fan Xian from a distance and give him moral support. Fan Xian did not turn his head to look at those children. He continued to look at the Supreme Court Yamen. A comforting smile rose to his face. A mighty sound rang out from inside the Yamen. Before long, the former litigation master of the Overwatch Council, Jingdo's richest mouth, Song Shiren, silently walked out of the Supreme Court Yamen. There was no joy on his face. On the contrary, there was a hint of darkness. Ever since Fan Xian had been stripped of his position as the director of the Overwatch Council, Song Shiren, a non-staff member, did not want to stay in the Overwatch Council anymore. Instead, he had come directly to find Fan Xian. Fan Xian had not thought that this rich mouth would have such a grateful side. After feeling slightly surprised, he settled him down. Coincidentally, the court was beginning to clean up Fan Xian's people. For the sake of the court's face, they could not use the methods of special agents. Everything had to respect the Qin law. Thus, Fan Xian had sent him out. At least, he had to help his subordinates obtain a relatively fair ending. Looking at Song Shiren's expression, Fan Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. Right now, I can't enter the Yamen. That's why I'm asking you. We've all seen the case. There's no reason we can't win. We know that the court has arranged for witnesses and evidence, but there's nothing we can do. Song Shiren sighed and looked at Fan Xian. Didn't you also use this method to punish the Ming family in Jiangnan? Fan Xian's heart trembled slightly. His voice was suppressed to a cold line. In a stern voice, he said, I don't expect to help Wanli escape punishment. However, the victory I speak of, at least. I have to see him right now. 3 years in prison. Song Shiren said dejectedly. Working for Sir Fan Jr. was like going against the entire court on his own. No matter how he fought this case, he would lose. How can there be such a thing as a prisoner? Fan Xian angrily rebuked him. 3,000 taels of silver, at most 3,000 li. The law of the Qing kingdom clearly states that returning the stolen goods and returning the money can be considered a crime. How did you fight this lawsuit? Song Shiren wanted to say something but stopped. He forced a smile and said, naturally, the Qing law is written like this. Originally, returning the stolen money and discussing the crime had already been agreed upon yesterday. However, when Scholar he came to see the trial today, he erased this clause and changed it to imprisonment. He Zhongwei. Hearing this familiar name, Fan Xian did not get angry. On the contrary, he smiled. After a moment of silence, he took out a banknote from his clothes. Restraining his expression, he calmly said, "Go in again and give this banknote to the official of the Supreme Court. Ask him how exactly did he learn the Qing law. Do you want me to personally stand out and fight this lawsuit with him?" Song Shiren accepted the banknote and looked at the 30,000 liang on it. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and walked back up the yamen. He knew that Fan Xian had done this because he had been forced by the court into a corner. For the sake of Yang Wanli's life and death, Fan Xian could only stand out and sell his not-so-old face. It all depended on what the officials of the Supreme Court would think. No one knew what Song Shiren said after he went in. Before long, an official coughed gently and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. He said something by Fan Xian's ear. Fan Xian did not reply. He only shook his head. The official's expression was helpless as he walked back. Finally, Song Shiren helped Yang Wanli out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He could see that Yang Wanli had been tortured in the prison. A dark fire surged in his heart, but he took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed it. He called for a few servants to lift Yang Wanli into the carriage. Yang Wanli brushed past him. This teacher and student, who were very close in age, did not say anything. However, a glimmer of dissatisfaction flashed through Yang Wanli's eyes, as well as a glimmer of grief and anger. Fan Xian felt a chill. He knew what Yang Wanli was grieving and angry about. An official who wholeheartedly wanted to do something, yet because of these trivial matters in the court and royal palace, he had to endure an injustice that he did not have. Not only would he lose his position and be tortured, but his reputation would also be tarnished. As a scholar, who could bear this? Just as Fan Xian was preparing to leave, the scholar of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, He Zhongwei, accompanied by a few officials, slowly walked out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. He Zhongwei looked at Fan Xian and was silent for a moment. He then said, "Master Fan, you are very elegant." Fan Xian couldn't even be bothered to glance at him. This attitude made the officials by He Zhongwei's side angry. The situation in Jingdo was no longer what it was in the past. He Zhongwei was currently popular, but Fan Xian had long been a commoner. To not answer an official's question in front of him was against the rules. He Zhongwei did not have any emotional reaction. He asked, "I am very curious. What exactly did you say to that official earlier for the official of the Supreme Court to suddenly change his mind?" This was something that scholar he was very curious about. He often entered the palace and knew that the crack between the emperor and Sir Fan Jr. could no longer be mended. Thus, when he looked at Fan Xian now, he was not as afraid as he had been in the past. He had come to the hearing by imperial edict. He had secretly done something to ensure that Yang Wanli, one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, would never have a chance to rise again. He had not expected that everything, which had gone according to plan, would suddenly change. It was clear that this young man was no longer favored by the emperor and held no official position. Why had the officials of the Supreme Court been frightened back by his words? He Zhongwei thought hard but could not understand. He didn't know what kind of magic Fan Xian had to make these officials not even listen to the emperor's hints. Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him coldly. I said to that official, don't force me to act out. You want to force me to act out? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at He Zongwei's slightly dark face. Suddenly, he smiled slightly and said, actually, I also want to know. What can you do to me when I flatter an official of the court on the street? After these words were said, the officials at He Zongwei's side finally understood that Fan Xian's power did not just lie in official position and power. They took a step back in fright, but He Zongwei continued to stand calmly in front of Fan Xian. He sighed. Understanding the reason, he couldn't help but feel some regret. In terms of official position and power, he might be able to suppress him. However, in the face of ruthless and unreasonable killing, he would never be as arrogant as him. The Suzhou Zhizhou, Qing Jialin, was accused of visiting a prostitute and invading the mausoleum. He has been asked to return to the capital to defend himself. In a few days, he will probably come back to the Supreme Court, He Zongwei said warmly. It looks like even you, a wealthy and idle person in Jingdou, cannot truly be idle. Fan Xian's eyelids drooped slightly. Casually, he said, you are the emperor's dog, so you have to run around everywhere. I don't. Many years ago, Fan Xian had already slapped He Zongwei in the face. Now, outside the yamen, he had coldly called He Zongwei a dog on the street. It was like slapping him in the face again. After all, He Zongwei was no longer the little imperial censor of the past. As the first-ranked official in court, he had his own face to consider. Furthermore, there were so many people watching. His slightly dark face gradually changed. In a cold voice, he said, as an official, I am the emperor's dog. In my eyes, you are also the emperor's dog. Are you not? Scholar, he thought that these words were appropriate. Not only did he preserve his dignity, but he also blocked these words and made it difficult for Fan Xian to respond. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian smiled when he heard these words. If I am a dog, then what is the emperor? Fan Xian said with a cold smile as he looked at him mockingly. He then turned and climbed into the carriage. He Zongwei's expression froze. He knew he had said the wrong thing. It was just like how he didn't understand how Fan Xian could influence the Supreme Court. No matter how he had been demoted, he was still the emperor's flesh and blood. On this point alone, the people of the world could not compare. A powerful sadness rose in He Zongwei's heart. He felt that life was always so unfair. In Jingdou, Fan Xian could not be idle. When he met the emperor's combination of punches with great difficulty, he could only focus on blocking. He had no ability or method to counterattack. On the true battlefield between him and the emperor, a soul-stirring drama was playing out. These dramas had no audience and were not recorded in the annals of history, but they were truly playing out. Only in these places could Fan Xian have enough power to carry out the most decisive counterattack against the chess pieces the emperor had laid out. In Dingzhou and Xiliang Road, no one knew what kind of entanglement Li Hongqing and Gong Dian, who had come to take over his position, were having. On the road from the Qing kingdom to Dongyi, the armies of the two sides were facing off. No one was willing to give way. The 3,000 soldiers of the Yanjing camp for winter training were forcefully blocked at the border, not daring to take a step in. This situation had been at a stalemate for 3 days. The emperor has an edict for us to enter Dongyi to assist the great prince in quelling the rebellion. In the end, the great prince has blocked it with a military order, saying that his 10,000 elite soldiers are enough. The commander of the Yanjing camp, Wang Jikuan, looked at his trusted aides in the tent and smiled coldly. Since those 10,000 elite soldiers are quelling the rebellion in the Liang kingdom, who can stop our soldiers from entering Dongyi? When he said this, Wang Jikuan's anger finally exploded. This was originally a test the court had sent toward Dongyi. Everything had been going according to plan. If the great prince had not sent troops to stop them, these 3,000 elite soldiers would have been the vanguard. The Yenjing camp had prepared 20,000 people to advance along the road. Who knew that these 3,000 elite soldiers would be blocked at the border and not be able to take a step in? He pointed at the generals below and scolded, 1,000. Are 1,000 people enough to scare you out of your wits? They are also soldiers of the Qin kingdom. Do they actually dare to attack the army sent by the court? Those are the Black Knights, a general said in a trembling voice. Chen Pingping is dead, and Sir Fan Jr. is under house arrest in Jingdo. Who knows if these Black Knights, who kill without batting an eye, will actually pull out their swords. The corners of Wang Jikuan's eyes twitched slightly, but he didn't curse angrily. As for this secret military operation, he had nominally accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs winter training. In reality, he had accepted the Emperor's secret edict from the palace. Just as he said earlier, this was a test. This was the Emperor sitting on the throne testing his eldest son far away in Dongyi. The news of the Jingdo incident had long reached Yenjing. Only now did Wang Jikuan know that the Duke had led the Black Knight straight into Jingdo to save old Director Qin. The commander of Yenjing didn't know why Director Qin had suddenly been purged by the Emperor. Although he sighed slightly in his heart, as a soldier of the Qin kingdom, he had to obey the Emperor's edict. Not long after the Jingdo incident, the Great Prince suddenly sent an urgent military report saying that volunteer armies were rising and falling within Dongyi. The chaos of war was frequent, and it was impossible for him to escape and return to the capital in a short time. This blocked any way for Jingdo to summon him back. Wang Jikuan knew that the Great Prince didn't want to return to the capital. As the saying goes, when a general is outside, the ruler's orders cannot be obeyed. It was clear that the Great Prince, who had successfully controlled 10,000 elite soldiers, had already left the Emperor's heart because of the Jingdo incident. Once the Great Prince's attitude was revealed, the Emperor was not angry. Instead, he sent an edict to Dongyi, saying that he would send the Yenjing military into Dongyi to help the Great Prince quell the rebellion. Just as Wang Jikuan expected, the Great Prince forcefully refused the Yenjing camp's request to send out troops. Furthermore, the group used to stop the Yenjing army these 2 days was indeed not the Great Prince's people. The court couldn't even find an excuse. The Black Knights. Wang Jikuan furrowed his brow slightly. Thinking of this group of riders, which were not many but had exceptional battle power, he naturally thought of that idler in Jingdo. It's the last 2 days of 2008. I had wanted to write a separate chapter to canvas for votes and review, but I changed my mind and decided to leave it for when Qingyu was finished. A friend has said that the flavor of Qingyu has changed recently and is no longer sunny. I would like to explain this a little. Qingyu has actually not been sunny for a long time. With such a dead person, there is no sunlight. Ever since I started writing Qingyu, I have always had an opinion that Fan Xian is not like a transmigrator. How should I explain this? I will leave this question for the last time as it takes up too many words. Of course, if there are friends who have noticed this, presumably you will know that my attitude toward transmigrators has long been made clear. However, I have always been curious. What should a transmigrator be like? In reality, human nature really has not evolved. Modern people, ancient people, and other people, as long as they are people, they are all equally ugly and beautiful. I almost forgot again. I seriously recommend to everyone Zhang Yu, the Fat Tabby Cat's new work, Song of the Heavenly Sword. The book number is 11211194. It is said that this author is a very gay and serious author. His writing speed is slow, but the quality is very good. From the day he wrote to the day he was reincarnated, presumably many friends like him. I am the same. This book is a wuxia novel. Those who write wuxia novels in this marketplace, without question, have invested far more in the battle of the spirit than in the battle of business. This kind of attitude has already ensured the quality of this book. I deeply believe this. Chapter 722. We have to go. Wang Jikuan did not say these words. He only glanced coldly at the generals in the tent and slapped the table. In a meaningful and heartfelt tone, he said, "I don't care who these Black Knights belong to. I only know that the Bureau of Military Affairs Winter Training Order says very clearly that no one can stop the 3,000 riders of the Yanjing camp entering Dongyi. The 3,000 Yanjing soldiers were just a test. They were the vanguard." It was the attitude the court was showing as it pressed toward the great prince step by step. Wang Jikuan's eyes narrowed slightly as a cold light gradually rose in them. He squeezed his voice into an icy line. No matter what, the 10,000 soldiers the great prince leads are, in the end, people of the Qin kingdom. The great prince cannot take the risk of a mutiny and bring those soldiers to stop them. Thus, the problem at hand is the 1,000 Black Knights placed around Nyoto Mountain. The day after tomorrow, we will send the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order to them. If they are still not willing to give way, then it can only prove that they are no longer part of the Qin Kingdom's army. But the Emperor's attitude toward Sir Fan Jr. is still unclear, a general said worriedly. If the Yanjing camp actually fought with the Black Knights, it would be the same as officially shedding all pretense of cordiality with Fan Xian's faction. The atmosphere in Jingdo was very delicate. The generals in Yanjing did not know exactly how the person in the palace was planning to deal with Fan Xian. If they just wanted to give Fan Xian the cold shoulder, then the Yanjing camp's actions were too dark and heavy. In the future, it would be difficult to salvage the situation. The tent was deep in Yanjing. It was actually a very large room. However, it had a name with a strong military flavor. The generals in the room were all Wang Jikuan's trusted subordinates, so there were many things they could say that were not taboo. Some things could be said openly. The worry the general spoke of earlier was actually the worry in Wang Jikuan's heart. The emperor had indeed removed all of Fan Xian's official positions, but he had never truly questioned him. Who knew how the situation would develop in the future? Outside Yanjing, the 1,000 Black Riders at the foot of Nyoto Mountain were indeed a powerful force. However, Wang Jikuan had led troops for 20 years. The Yanjing camp controlled 100,000 elite soldiers. Just based on numbers and equipment, they were the best of the Qin Kingdom's 5 roads border soldiers. It was impossible that they could not break through the 1,000 Black Riders' blockade. The problem at hand was that it was impossible for Yanjing to throw in all its troops. Once the flames of war ignited, Dongyi would only belong in name. The hearts of the people would not be settled. It would probably lead to the Qin Kingdom's first true civil war. Wang Jikuan did not dare to bear this kind of historical responsibility. His position in the military had already climbed to the top. Regardless of what other contributions he made on the battlefield, at most, he would return to Jingdo like Commander Yi and become the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs. There would be some progress in his reputation, but in reality, there were no benefits. For this governor of Yanjing, there was very little room left in life for him to struggle. Thus, he had to think about the descendants of his family and the future. Although the emperor still looked down on the world, he was, in the end, old. There would come a day when he would pass away. If Fan Xian could survive this storm. No, even if Fan Xian couldn't, once the third prince sat on the throne, given his relationship with Fan Xian, would he tolerate him? Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed tightly. After all, he was a military commander. He was skilled in strategy on the battlefield, but it was difficult for him to notice the movements in the details. The matter of the Jingdo concubines had not allowed him to understand the emperor's plans. His brows furrowed tightly and then relaxed. Finally, he made up his mind. In a cold voice, he said, "We'll move the day after tomorrow. If anyone dares to stop us, seize their weapons." All of the Yenjing generals had their own thoughts and left the camp with heavy hearts. They were not sure if the military operation the day after tomorrow would actually cause a conflict with the Black Knights. They also did not know if the great prince in Dongyi would actually lead the 10,000 elite soldiers back to the east and directly oppose the Qing kingdom's border soldiers. To sum it up, these loyal Qing generals were worried whether the Qing kingdom's first civil war would erupt in the area under their jurisdiction. Governor Wang seemed to have made up his mind. That night, he went to the Mei Manor and found the leader of the civil officials in Yenjing, Mei Zhili. Mei Zhili was Duke Lu's student. Although he did not have a deep relationship with Fan Xian, he was familiar with Fan Xian. After hearing Commander Wang's sincere request for advice, Sir Mei lightly asked Wang Jikuan a question. "Ji, is still in Jingdo, right?" Mei Zhili had left his position as the Jingdo magistrate in the 4th year of the Qin calendar and had come to Yenjing. He cooperated harmoniously with Governor Wang's military and political affairs and rarely meddled. Governor Wang deeply understood Sir Mei's foresight and strategy. Just by being able to leave the position of Jingdo magistrate unscathed, one could tell how capable he was in officialdom. The two of them had a good personal relationship, so Sir Mei addressed the young lady of the Wang family as naturally as he would a junior and only called her Ji. Hearing the words, Ji, Governor Wang's expression did not change. His heart, which had been tempered by the ice and snow of the battlefield, trembled involuntarily. He knew what Mei Zhili wanted to make clear. Wang Ji had entered Prince Heqing's manor in June and become the great prince's secondary fei. Before this young lady was married, she had been exhorted to her face by Fan Xian and lectured for a number of months. Other than Jingdo and Yenjing, most people in the world knew that other than Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Fan Xian had 3 other students of noble status. The first was the 3rd prince, the second was the young lady of the Yi family, Yi Ling, and the third was the young lady of the Yenjing Governor Wang's manor. In the Qin kingdom, filial piety was the most important word, followed by the word of one's teacher. Given the relationship between the Yenjing manor and Fan Xian, the 1,000 Black Knights blocking the foot of Nyoto Mountain appeared complicated. Wang Jikuan glanced at Mei Zhili. After a moment of silence, he said, "There is an edict from the palace and an order from the Bureau of Military Affairs. Even if it will incite some discussion in the future, this matter has to be done." "Governor, you misunderstand." Mei Zhili's eyes were focused on his nose and his nose was focused on his heart. He had already escaped the political whirlpool of Jingdo for a number of years. Originally, he had no intention of participating in this major matter. However, he was born in the manor of Duke and had too deep a connection with Yi Guipin and the 3rd prince in the palace. Although he was currently in Yenjing, if he wanted to escape in the future, it would probably be very difficult. Thus, tonight, he had spoken these words clearly in front of Wang Jikuan. The teacher-student relationship between Sir Fan Jr. and Ji is certainly worrisome. Most importantly, Mei Zhili sighed and looked at Wang Jikuan. "You want to send troops to Dongyi, but anyone with eyes can see that the great prince is no longer listening to Jingdo's edict. Ji is a secondary fei of the manor. Have you thought about this problem? If the great prince truly takes over Dongyi and makes himself king, even if you gather 100,000 soldiers in Yenjing and take down Dongyi, what will Ji do in the manor?" Wang Jikuan had guarded the Qin kingdom's borders for many years and had suffered hardships. At the age of 40, he had a daughter. He loved her like a treasure and couldn't help being arrogant and willful. This created Wang Tong's bad habits. Fortunately, Fan Xian had forcefully suppressed her bad temper. Every time he thought of this, Wang Jikuan felt a bit of gratitude toward Sir Fan Jr. However, after being pointed out by Mei Zhili, he said in a daze, perhaps Sir Fan Jr. had long predicted the present situation. Is that why, contrary to everyone's expectations, he used his status as an official of Taichung Temple to facilitate the great prince's marriage to Ji Er? Thinking of this, Wang Zhikuan's heart chilled. He had not thought that the Duke would have such deep and far-sighted plans. It truly made one's heart tremble. Wang Zhikuan's position was truly awkward. Although the Yanjing camp was powerful, Dongyi, where its blade was pointed, was already within the range of the great prince and Fan Xian's power. Yet, these two young nobles had an inextricable connection to Wang Zhikuan. One was his son-in-law, and the other was his daughter's teacher. Mei Zhili thought for a moment and then said, as for what Sir Fan Jr. was thinking at the beginning, there is no point in you and me guessing now. However, there is something I must remind you. If I can think of the problem here, then the person in the palace can also think of it. Yet, the palace still hasn't done anything to Yanjing. He raised his head and glanced at Wang Zhikuan lightly. If Sir Fan Jr. had truly predicted the present situation, then it can only be said that he had great foresight. Governor, you hold the fort in Yanjing, yet you are targeting Dongyi. If the emperor suspects that you are not diligent enough, then no matter who comes, it will probably be difficult to solidify the Yanjing military's morale. Thus, Dongyi's safety will be a bit more guaranteed. My loyalty to the emperor can be seen by the sun and moon. If Fan Xian wants to use this, it won't work. There was no anger in Wang Zhikuan's words. Mei Zhili nodded and said, it is clear that Sir Fan Jr.'s arrangements have not been effective. Jingdo has not done anything to Yanjing. In the end, the emperor is a wise ruler and trusts you greatly. Even the military order from the Bureau of Military Affairs and the secret edict from the palace are actually a test the emperor has given you. Wang Zhikuan was stern. He raised his fist in a salute and said, I have learned my lesson. Mei Zhili's expression remained serious. Slowly, he said, but, Governor, are you really not going to consider Tong-er anymore? Consider the discussion of the world. If you can truly subdue Dongyi in one battle, you will be a meritorious official of the Qin kingdom. Once civil war breaks out and the flames of war continue, the pressure from all sides will be piled onto your shoulders. But, what can I do? If I truly suppress my troops and do not move, I will be letting down the emperor's trust. Wang Zhikuan's brows rose. The conflict in Jingdo will, in the end, land on the battlefield. As the emperor's official, there are many things I have to do. I have to do it. If I can't, then I won't do it. Mei Zhili looked at him calmly. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, to say something disrespectful, this is, after all, a family matter of the emperor. As officials, you and I must be loyal to the emperor. If the Qin kingdom truly breaks out into civil war, how will you and I explain it to the world? The change in Jingdo should land on the battlefield. However, it is clear that Sir Fan Jr. and the emperor do not wish for this turmoil to spread too far and wide. Otherwise, the emperor would not continue to let Sir Fan Jr. live, and Sir Fan Jr. would not stay in Jingdo as a wealthy and idle person. Those two are both guarding that bottom line. Governor, when you send out your troops in 2 days, please remember this bottom line. You can threaten or invade, but if you really want blood to flow like rivers, I think it is not wise. I'm afraid that is not the result the emperor wants. But the other party is the Black Knights. Those wolf cubs of the Overwatch Council do not know what it means to retreat, Wang Zhikuan said with his eyes closed. This is too difficult to grasp. You have to send out troops, but you can't actually fight. You can't ruin the emperor's grand plan, but you also have to prevent the situation from becoming too serious. Speaking of this, Governor Wang let out a deep sigh. He had lived his entire life in the light of knives and shadows, but he had never encountered such a complicated situation. If they wanted to fight, then fight. That was the simplest. Even if the other party was Fan Xian or the Great Prince, if they truly threw the east of the kingdom into chaos, the emperor would not be happy. Since the emperor has a secret edict, we have to fight. At the very least, we have to truly confront each other and suppress the Black Knight's momentum. Mei Zhili's eyelids drooped slightly. The palace's edict must be carried out. Pressing down like a storm on a mountain, how many days can the Black Knights resist? Although they are a group of cold-blooded riders who kill people like flies, the Great Prince is not, and neither is Sir Fan Jr. This kind of situation will not last for many days. In the end, they will have to shed all pretense of cordiality. Wang Jikuan looked at him and reminded, the emperor's edict is here. I don't want the emperor to mistakenly think that I am not doing my job well. No, there will certainly be an opportunity for the situation between Yanjing and Dongyi to stabilize. Mei Zhili looked at him and suddenly smiled slightly. Sir Fan Jr. has spent so much effort on Shang, and your relationship with the Great Prince in order to seek a balance between the two sides. As for the Emperor's edict, I think he will certainly have a way to end this matter. Although it is difficult to disobey an edict, I do not want to meet the men of the Qing kingdom on the battlefield. Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed deeply. A moment later, he slowly said, however, I cannot see any way in the current situation that I cannot disobey an edict and still withdraw troops from Nyoto Mountain. That will depend on Sir Fan Jr.'s methods. Mei Zhili calmly extended a finger. If he wants to continue, he needs a variable. We don't know what this variable is, but Sir Fan Jr. will certainly know. Wang Jikuan sighed and said, I don't believe he can do this. If he can actually find this variable within 5 days, I'm afraid I will have to be like Shang, and admire him endlessly. 2 days later, there was a somber atmosphere both inside and outside Yanjing. The border soldiers that had gathered from various military camps gathered in front of the city and set out toward the east. After traveling for half a day, they had met up with the 3,000 Yanjing soldiers they had sent earlier and arrived at the foot of Nyoto Mountain. A government road passed by the foot of Nyoto Mountain, passing through the golden and bright red edge of the late autumn forest and extending toward the shore of the East Sea. Following this road, the army could reach Dongyi. The black mass of soldiers gathered there. Banners fluttered in the wind. The riders wore light armor and had a murderous aura. There were more than 10,000 people in this army. Their aura looked very frightening. However, such a menacing Qing border soldier was held back at the foot of Nyoto Mountain and could not advance a single step. At the entrance of the government road at the foot of the mountain, there were 3 rows of black-armored riders waiting solemnly. There were only 3 rows, a total of 100 or so riders. However, they gave off a frightening coldness as they blocked the center of the road. On both sides of the gentle slope halfway up the mountain, there were 2 even thicker black ink lines. They were also the Black Knights. In order to show his loyalty to the emperor, Yanjing Governor Wang Jikuan had put in a lot of capital for this test. He had sent 10,000 border soldiers. Of course, the governor would not personally lead the troops. The one leading them was one of his trusted generals who had already received a secret order. This general looked at the Black Knights on the road in the distance and felt a chill in his heart. The Qing military had long been famous and envious of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They had the best equipment, the best warhorses, and the light armor all over their bodies were personally made by the 3 workshops of the palace treasury. Their battle power was completely piled up with gold. There had always been a legend within the military that if the Black Knights did not exceed 1,000, they could not be defeated if they exceeded 1,000. This was, of course, because the generals of the Qing military deeply knew the power of the Black Knights during their cooperation over the decades. It was also because the Qing law and edict strictly limited the number of black knights to below 1,000. Of course, there were military generals who were not convinced. The name of the elites of the Qing military shook the world. Regardless of whether it was the Dingzhou cavalry or the Long Arrow camp of the northern camp, they were all illustrious figures. How could they allow a subordinate cavalry of the Overwatch Council to steal all of the limelight? During the Jingdo Rebellion 3 years ago, Fan Xian had led 500 Black Knights into Jingdo and engaged in a bloody battle under Jingyang Gate. The Black Knights were like death gods from the underworld. In front of countless pairs of eyes, they had forcefully torn apart the rebel army cavalry. Those were the elites of the old Qin family. Even Qin Heng had been stabbed to death by the Black Knight spears. This iron-like reality made the Qing military truly understand the power of the Black Knights. No one dared to underestimate them again. They even felt an indescribable fear in their hearts. The Yanjing general narrowed his eyes and looked at the lone rider in front of the Black Knights. From the other party's silver mask, he clearly knew the other party's identity. It was the commander of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, the silver-masked Jing Gu. The Yanjing general's heart chilled slightly. He knew that the commander of the Black Knights was the fierce general who had stabbed Qin Heng with one spear. After thinking for a moment, the Yanjing general led a few soldiers and squeezed their horses' bellies. With a clatter, they moved closer to the Black Knights' defensive line. Commander Jing. The Yanjing general ordered his subordinate to hand over the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. In a heavy voice, he said, "Please make way." Jing Gu silently accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. After glancing at it, he said, "We are only under the jurisdiction of the Overwatch Council. Until now, we have not received any council orders, so forgive me for not being able to comply." The Great Prince led 10,000 elite soldiers and was actually stationed in the Song Kingdom not far from Nyoto Mountain. However, in order to deal with the court's inquiries, he could not personally lead troops to stop them. He could only give this task to the Black Knights. The mask on Jing Ji's face glowed with a cold silver light. Looking at the densely packed Yanjing army in front of him, he said in a heavy voice, "I am under orders to guard Dongyi. Unrelated people are strictly forbidden from entering. If anyone dares to take a step in, kill without mercy." His words were spoken very clearly and calmly, yet it carried an unquestionable certainty. Under orders to guard Dongyi. Under whose orders? Sir Fan Jr.'s. However, Fan Xian was no longer the director of the Overwatch Council. As for only listening to the orders of the Overwatch Council, that was even more of a joke. If Yan Bingyun truly sent an Overwatch Council official to mobilize troops, the Black Knights would probably cleanly execute the person and then burn the council order into a pile of black ash. These words made the Yanjing general's heart slightly cold and angry. In a cold voice, he said, "This is the court's order. Are you going to defy it?" Jing Gu did not reply. After he finished the conversation that needed to be carried out, he reminded, "Don't think about making a detour into Dongyi. I don't want to cross the mountains to seize your weapons." After saying this, he pulled on the reins of his horse and returned to the solemn Black Knights. The metal spear hanging horizontally by his saddle shone with a cold light. The Yanjing general took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. Narrowing his eyes, he observed the Black Knights close at hand. After looking for a moment, he had to admit that the other party's equipment was far superior to his. Looking at the weight of the equipment, he knew that the quality of the individual soldiers and the quality of the warhorses were far above that of the Yanjing generals. Although there were only 1,000 people, it was easier said than done to charge in with as little blood as possible when faced with 1,000 killing gods. The true confrontation between the Yanjing camp and the Black Knights entered the third day. It was also the fifth day Governor Wang had calculated. There were occasional small scuffles between the two sides. The Yanjing side's desire for battle and anger had already surged. Although the Black Knights were few in number, they were still unusually cold and not excited. It was a time of mutual hostility. Governor Wang also felt that he could not endure it any longer. He had to teach the Black Knights a lesson. Because of the Emperor's edict, waiting for 5 days was already giving Fan Xian and the Great Prince enough time to react. If the Yanjing side continued to maintain the situation of confrontation and were unable to enter Dongyi, the Emperor in Jingdo would probably be unusually angry. Just as Wang Jikuan was preparing to sign the military order to forcefully enter the Nyoto Mountain front line and launch an attack on the Black Knights, a general suddenly held a battle report with a serious expression and quickly rushed into the governor's manor. Wang Jikuan narrowed his eyes as he read the contents of the battle report. His heart felt a chill. He had not thought that Fan Xian would actually be able to create a variable in the north of the Qing kingdom. Furthermore, this variable was one that he had never thought of. He knew that his army could be pulled back. He had not disobeyed the emperor's edict and had not allowed civil war to erupt within his jurisdiction. This should have been a wonderful thing. For some reason, there was not a glimmer of calmness in Wang Jikuan's eyes. They were filled with worry. The military report came from the northern camp in Cangzhou. It clearly said that Shang Shanhu, who had been resting in Shangjing in northern Qi, had suddenly returned to the border. Leading 100,000 soldiers, he headed straight for the southern front. He was already 70 li north of Cangzhou. Today is the last day of 2008. Originally, I had some feelings. Later, I thought about it and decided to leave it for next month when the Qing year ends to chat with everyone. I just wish everyone a happy new year, truly happy. Those who still have monthly votes, please vote. Don't waste it. This is the last month. I want to look a bit more glorious. Tomorrow, I hear that the monthly votes have doubled. I hesitate. Chapter 723. It was late autumn, and the wind began to pick up. The cold air whistled down from the extreme north, sweeping past the wastelands of the North Sea and the endless North Sea Lake to the north of Cangzhou. Cangzhou was at the northern end of the Qing kingdom. It was the closest city to northern Qi. Purely based on geography, it should be southeast of Shangjing. However, because the cold wind followed the North Sea every year and traveled south, this place was even colder than Shangjing. The autumn trees around them had already lost all their leaves, and the fields below the city were busy harvesting their only harvest at the end of summer. Now, the fields had turned into stubble after stubble, and were covered with a layer of frost, looking very pitiful. It had already snowed a few times. Passing the Qing kingdom fields, the hills in the distance were still covered in snow. It looked very quiet. On the snowy plains, one could faintly see many black dots and northern Qi flags fluttering in the snowy wind. A general on the walls of Cangzhou narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. The scouts had long reported back that the northern Qi army heading south covered the sky and covered the earth. It was impossible to tell how many there were. It was probably the entire strength of the northern Qi army in the south. The northern Qi people had come. The Cangzhou guards were not very afraid. Although the enemy was powerful, they still did not feel a glimmer of fear. During these 20 years, the two sides had fought countless battles, and the northern Qi people had never gained any advantage. Even though the northern Qi general, Shang Shanhu, had been moved out of the northern gate by the northern Qi emperor and had come to the south, he had not been able to advance a single step through the Qing army's tight defenses. The only thing that worried the Cangzhou general was the man called Shang Shanhu. Since 20 years ago, after the Qing emperor no longer personally led troops, the only person in the world who could truly be called a god of war was probably this general Shang Shanhu. This was the glory he had obtained through his years of bloody battles with the barbarians in the north. These few years, the northern Qi army's morale and equipment were clearly far inferior to the Qin kingdoms, but they were still able to maintain a balanced situation in the Zhangzhou area. It was all because of this person called Shang Shanhu. He used soldiers like a god and was skilled in the art of splitting and thrusting. He did not truly exhaust all of his strength, but he managed to exhaust the Qin kingdom's two border armies here. After years of small conflicts and friction, both sides strictly guarded their borders and did not carry out any truly large military movements. In the eyes of the Qin kingdom, they were only making preparations and stockpiling rations and military equipment, waiting for the emperor's final order to send out troops. The emperor was still tidying up the court. The Qin kingdom's vanguard army was also waiting. They had not expected that before they could attack, northern Qi would come first. Based on previous years' practice, once autumn came, the two sides would stop harassing and probing each other. General Shang Shanhu would be summoned back to Shangjing for his annual vacation. Why had he suddenly returned from Shangjing this year? The ground slowly began to shake. The sound of the shaking was not loud, and the sound was not very shocking. The black lines on the distant snowy hills gradually drew closer in the direction of Zhangzhou. As the distance grew closer and closer, in the eyes of the soldiers on Zhangzhou, the countless black lines and the dark cloud-like military formation were gradually broken down into sections of military camps and into specific people. Wearing armor and holding knives and spears, the northern Qi soldiers with faces full of solemnity. The soldiers on Zhangzhou even felt that they could clearly see the frost on the northern Qi people's eyebrows and their pale hands holding long spears. A tense and oppressive atmosphere quickly spread through Zhangzhou. Immediately after, it was accompanied by the low shouts of the officers. Messengers holding banners hurried back and forth between the dozen corner towers on the city walls. The Zhangzhou defending general put down the telescope the palace treasury had made in his eyes. His brows were furrowed deeply. He said to himself, "What exactly do these northern Qi people want to do?" The temperature on the top of the city walls was very low. The words he spoke immediately turned into mist and shrouded his face. Just like the densely packed northern Qi army and horses in the distance outside Zhangzhou, it hid the truth and made countless people feel confused. The defending general slowly gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the northern Qi people with astonishing power below the snowy hills in the distance. It was as if he wanted to see through their true intentions. Did they really want to move south en masse? The defending general did not believe this because he believed that Shang Shanhu, a famous general of a generation, would not be so foolish. No matter how skillful the northern Qi generals were at using troops, they would not mobilize so many people to directly attack the Qin kingdom in the bitter cold of the end of autumn. This was a suicidal method. Attack the city. The Qin kingdom's soldiers also did not believe it. Although the northern Qi army that had appeared outside Zhangzhou had an astonishing power and was estimated to be 40,000 people, they did not have enough siege weapons. What did they have to take down Zhangzhou? There were 20,000 elite soldiers inside Zhangzhou waiting with their spears at the ready. General, the northern Qi people have already penetrated deep into the country, an officer beside the Zhangzhou defending general reminded him. His brows twitched a little. It was clear he was angry at Zhangzhou's inaction. They watched as the northern Qi army invaded the country, yet the northern camp did not react at all. The Qin kingdom had not endured such humiliation in many years. The Zhangzhou defending general did not have any reaction. He knew that his conservative response these 2 days had already made many proud Qin kingdom generals angry. However, he knew he was facing Shang Shanhu. Particularly, the northern Qi military's sudden movement that came without warning like snowflakes made him very wary. He could not guess what the other party wanted to do. The northern Qi and southern soldiers split into 3 groups. Using great speed, they broke through the border between the 2 countries and invaded the area controlled by the Qin kingdom's northern camp. This was a large movement the northern Qi people had not made in 20 years. Yet, before this, neither the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council or the military's own intelligence network had caught a whiff of it. Northern Qi's 100,000-strong army had forcefully entered the country. It appeared to be a powerful force, but it was impossible for them to directly break through to the south. However, every military operation always had a purpose. So, what was the purpose of Shang Shanhu's shocking action? There were 20,000 soldiers inside Cangzhou, while the northern camp's powerful strength was scattered among the 4 camps with Cangzhou as the center. In front of the city, the 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers were aggressive. But they had split up and entered deep into the Qin kingdom's territory. Was the other party not worried that the northern camp would move troops from all over to surround them? It was late autumn, cold, and heavy with dew. Northern Qi's lone army was advancing far away. There would certainly be major problems with logistics. As long as Cangzhou was sealed and Shang Shanhu was drawn into attack, the 4 camps of the northern camp would quietly surround them. Other than rushing to retreat, what other choice did these 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers have? They couldn't get any benefits at all, yet they had to move so many soldiers and use up so much rations and energy. What exactly did Shang Shanhu want to do? The Cangzhou defending general's brows were furrowed tightly. Looking at the northern Qi people who had already begun to set up camp in the distance, he sank into deep thought. He completely ignored the angry expressions of his subordinates. It was already the 5th day. Northern Qi's largest military operation in 20 years was unexpectedly met with the Qin kingdom's most patient response. The Cangzhou defending general sealed the city and did not come out. The various camps of the northern camp only waited solemnly as they watched the northern Qi people step onto their land. However, they did not make any strong reactions. This was not in line with the Qin kingdom's pride and blood. Even the northern Qi soldiers, who were silently crossing the Qin kingdom's border and waiting at all times for a bloody battle with the Qin kingdom's army on the battlefield, felt a glimmer of surprise and strangeness. In a small city about 60 li from the border between the 2 countries, the headquarters of Northern Qi's military operation was set up there. In a private house that had been requisitioned in the city, charcoal was burning in a brazier. The red on the inside seeped through the layer of silver ash on the outside, filling the entire room with the warmth of spring. However, the high-ranking Northern Qi generals in the room were not warming themselves by the fire. They stood by a table and looked worriedly at the flattened military map of the south on the table. Occasionally, they would glance at the person sitting in the grand armchair. Shang Shanhu sat in the grand armchair with his eyes slightly closed. It was as if he was deep in thought or deep sleep. Suddenly, he slowly opened his eyes and asked, "It's been 5 days since the 3 roads entered the country. Has there been any movement from Cangzhou?" The voice of Northern Qi's foremost general was not loud, but it was deep and powerful. "Commander, Cangzhou is still locked in," a general replied respectfully. "Following commander's orders, the 3 roads of troops have not gone deep, other than the one in Cangzhou. Who would have thought that our counterparts in the south would be more patient than in previous years?" Shang Shanhu stood up expressionlessly and walked to the side of the long table. Pointing at a certain point on the map, he said, "However, the Qin people are all proud and arrogant. Furthermore, this is a proper battle and cannot use tricks. The Cangzhou defending general can at most hold out for another 2 days. It is impossible for him to wait for Jingdo's edict to arrive. He must go out to battle. Otherwise, he will not be able to explain himself to the Qin court. What if they remain locked in the city and refuse to come out?" Shang Shanhu's trusted general asked worriedly. "This time, we've used all of our strength. If the other party holds out for another 2 days, the 4 military camps of the northern camp will see through the truth of the other 2 roads and directly surround them. If we don't receive them in time, we'll probably suffer heavy losses. Not only did the generals of the Qing Kingdom's northern camp not see through the truth of the northern Qi military's sudden movement, even the northern Qi people themselves didn't know why they were suddenly sending out troops. Furthermore, they were braving the bitter cold and such a large risk to go deep into Qing territory. Although this was indeed very satisfying, as soldiers, they wanted actual results and not to pay thousands or even tens of thousands of lives just to walk in front of the other party's city and flaunt their might. Perhaps only the emperor in the northern Qi royal palace in Shangjing and the silent general Shang Shanhu knew the inside story of sending out troops this time. But, who in this world dared to ask them? Although we've been on the defensive these years, don't think of the Qing army as too terrifying. Shang Shanhu's palm landed steadily on the map. The Qing kingdom's northern camp uses Zhangzhou as the center. 5 days have already passed, and the other 4 roads of the northern camp have not come to reinforce them. It can be said that they have been stopped by our 2 roads of troops. It also means that the northern camp currently lacks a backbone. A disinterested smile rose to Shang Shanhu's face. The Qing kingdom's equipment and military power are far above ours. If Yan Xiaoyi was still alive, 5 days ago, he would have given the order to abandon the other 2 gaps, surround Zhangzhou, and swallow up my 40,000 soldiers. However, in the northern camp, who would give such a risky military order? Yan Xiaoyi died, and Shi Fei came. Although that General Shi is not as good as Governor Yan, he is still a powerful figure. The Qing emperor was worried about him and moved him to the Jingdou garrison. Shang Shanhu smiled coldly and said, back then, the northern camp participated in the rebellion. The Qing emperor had many misgivings. How do the generals of the northern camp still have the ferocity and arrogance they once had under Yan Xiaoyi's hands? These years, the Qing kingdom appears to have been accumulating national power in preparation to invade the Qi kingdom. In reality, they have been harming their own national power, particularly in the northern camp. The Qing emperor is a remarkable figure. However, the remarkable figures under his command have died one after another. Shang Shanhu sighed as if he felt it was boring. Since it is so, if my 100,000 soldiers go in and take a look, who can stop me? Being conservative is their best choice, but also their worst choice. It's also the choice they have no choice but to make. However, that clever Zhangzhou general probably won't be able to suppress the northern camp's desire to counterattack for long. That is why it will be in 2 days. After Shang Shanhu said this, he walked out of the room, leaving behind the generals looking at each other. The wind and snow had risen outside the room. The snowflakes were not big, but they were fragmented and irritating. Shang Shanhu narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the busy soldiers and logistics officials in the city. A complicated emotion rose to his face. He thought of the emperor in Shangjing and the last time the emperor had urgently summoned him to the palace and ordered him to send out troops at all costs to help Dongyi stabilize. The vanguard of the northern camp was to attract the border army in Yanjing to come to their aid and help Dongyi temporarily relieve the pressure. A chill flashed through Shang Shanhu's eyes. He thought to himself, even if that noble in the south was truly going to turn against the Qing emperor, was it really worth it for northern Qi to pay such a large price? Regardless of whether it was worth it or not, northern Qi would still have to pay a price for this military operation. Just as Shang Shanhu had analyzed, on the 6th day of the battle, the Qing military finally made a valiant response. 2 paths of elite soldiers in the northern camp formed a crab pincer and leaped toward Zhangzhou. The other 2 camps sent out all of their troops. Braving the light snow falling from the sky, they charged toward the other 2 paths of northern Qi's army that had just entered the country. In just one day, 3 fires were lit. The wastelands in the north of the land immediately became a battlefield of slaughter. Riders charged, bowstrings strummed, arrows flew through the sky, and spears pierced through the wilderness. Fresh blood flowed, flames could be seen everywhere, and corpses lay in the filthy blood. The sounds of killing shot into the dark clouds in the sky. This piece of land, which had been silent for many years, finally became lively because of the Northern Qi army's brazen attack. The curtains were pulled back on the battlefield where hundreds of thousands of lives had been entangled. Everyone fought together with great vigor. However, this curtain was quickly pulled back by Shang Shanhu. Without a trace of blood on his body, the Cangzhou defending general walked out of the city under the protection of a large group of trusted soldiers. He watched coldly from the side as his subordinates cleaned up the battlefield. He looked at the arrows stuck deep into the withered trees and listened to the wretched cries of the wounded. His expression did not change at all. As a soldier, it was natural for him to fight for the emperor. However, there was always a chill in his heart that he could not get rid of. Even the joy of a Pyrrhic victory could not dilute it. After a night of forceful marching, the two reinforcements of the Qing army's northern camp finally formed an encirclement with the main garrison outside Cangzhou. Before they had time to rest for a moment, they suddenly realized that the northern Qi army seemed to show signs of leaving. The Qing army was mighty. How could they allow the enemy to wander within their borders and then leave so casually? An attack that was not fully prepared began. Fortunately, the border soldiers of the northern camp had fought for many years. The Qing kingdom's military power was very powerful. Thus, such a hurried attack was able to maintain a powerful force of attack. However, the northern Qi elites that Shang Shanhu had personally trained were not easy to deal with. After a large battle, the northern Qi army still maintained their formation perfectly after throwing down over 1,000 bodies. Using an unimaginable speed, they left the front line of the battlefield and valiantly threw down a few camps to abandon, not giving the Qing border soldiers any chance to give chase. This battle, it should be said that this strange battle had ended. The Qing kingdom had the geographical advantage and the advantage they already had, so they obtained victory. However, this victory did not achieve the results they had predicted. The northern Qi people ran too quickly. Looking at the captured supplies and rations, the Cangzhou garrison general narrowed his eyes and felt a glimmer of coldness. He finally understood why he had not seen the northern Qi people siege weapons at the beginning. Even if it was a trap, the other party should have at least brought a ladder. It turned out that from the very beginning, the other party was only prepared to fight a battle and then run. They did not bring any heavy supplies that were difficult to carry, and the entire army went into battle with light equipment. No wonder they did not collapse after the last encounter, and ran like rabbits. Why did they run? The highest-ranking general on the Cangzhou side once again sank into deep thought. He knew he was not a match for Shang Shanhu. If he could truly understand Shang Shanhu's thoughts and have a clear target, he would not be as scared as he was right now after winning a battle. The next day, shocking battle reports came from the other two battlefields. The two groups of northern Qi elites had not gone far into the territory. At the same time that the Qing army outside Cangzhou carried out a combined attack, the rest of the northern camp's military power also went out at the same time and killed their way toward the enemy camp on the border. However, the two groups of northern Qi elites ran even faster. All of the generals of the northern camp became cautious. They didn't know what the famous northern Qi general was planning. Thus, they forcefully restrained their subordinates and didn't allow the Qing Iron Riders to use the momentum of the counterattack to kill their way into northern Qi's territory. On the third day, a piece of bad news came. The 40,000 northern Qi elite troops that had escaped from the encirclement outside Cangzhou, on their way back into northern Qi territory, strangely passed through to the east and entered Dongyi Song Kingdom territory. They occupied a provincial city on the Song border. It was said that the troops in the Song Kingdom's provincial city did not put up any resistance. Dongyi also did not have any reaction. Thus, they allowed the 40,000 elite troops to enter the provincial city. This city appeared unremarkable and almost abandoned. In the past, no power had noticed this place. Now that Shang Shanhu had led his troops into the city, a large red dot appeared on the map. When the Qing military opened their eyes to take a look, they were shocked to find that this city happened to be right in the middle of the northern camp in Yanjing. It was like a fishbone that pierced all of the Qing soldiers and made them feel very uncomfortable. Was this Shang Shanhu's true intention? In the Battle of Zhangzhou, Northern Qi had lost and the Qing kingdom had won. It appeared so, but was this strange battle going to end just like that? After another dozen days, the Fourth Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the military's intelligence system simultaneously sent intelligence reports to the various generals in the northern camp. After the Northern Qi army of 100,000 pulled back into the country, they did not retreat and rest. Instead, they began to set up camp in the same place. Furthermore, from the depths of Northern Qi's vast country, they began to send all kinds of supplies toward the south in an endless stream. A storm was brewing. This was clearly the sign of a decisive battle. Additionally, Shang Shanhu had taken the unremarkable provincial city. The Qing military immediately became cautious. Without waiting for Jingdo's edict to arrive, they had already begun to make preparations to welcome the true battle. The battle might be next spring. In Yanjing, Commander Wang Jikuan was also forced to pull his attention back from Nyoto Mountain and turn it to the 40,000 Northern Qi soldiers above his head. He furrowed his brows tightly. He was furious in his heart. He had never thought that the variable Fan Xian had used would be collusion with the Northern Qi people. Immediately after, Jingdo's edict arrived and passed into the hands of the high-ranking generals in Yanjing and the northern camp. No one knew what the Qing emperor said in the edict. After the edict, the Qing kingdom's military power in the north began to rest, lie dormant, and calm. Immediately after, the master of Dongyi, Yunjilan, sent a message to the world. He expressed the strongest protest and anger toward the northern Qi people's brazen invasion. He said that Dongyi would stand by the side of the Qing emperor and would deal the most violent and destructive blows to all invaders. The most terrifying 13 disciples of the sword hut in Dongyi suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where they had gone. Receiving the news, the defenses of Shang Shanhu's camp in the provincial city immediately tightened. Just as the chaos in the north of the mainland was gradually rising, the northern Qi royal palace was peaceful. Imperial Consort Li, who was greatly favored by the emperor, looked at the emperor lying lazily on the couch. Biting her lip, she quietly said, "Dongyi has been saved for Fan Xian. The emperor has paid such a high price. I really don't know what he can give to thank you." "Thank me." The northern Qi emperor laughed coldly and gently rubbed his stomach. "That shameless person who is full of evil tricks but always considers himself a saint will probably curse me in my manner for rashly starting a war." Chapter 724. Jean Daodu climbed up from the couch. Sea Lily helped him put on a gray-black cloak. Walking to the door of the palace, he looked at the snowflakes drifting down outside. The highest ruler of Northern Qi sank into deep thought. Northern Qi inherited the Wei Kingdom and liked black, green, and other solemn colors. This 1,000-year-old palace built against the mountain was like this. The clothing he wore today was basically these two colors. His bare feet were wrapped in warm velvet shoes. He didn't know if they were warm. Snowflakes drifted past his slightly narrowed eyes and landed on the quiet ground. This palace was deep in the royal palace and not far from the Empress Dowager's palace. It was also not far from the little pavilion behind the mountain. It was very quiet. Without the emperor's permission, no random person was allowed to come close. There were very few eunuchs and serving girls serving to the left and right of this palace. They were all old servants that the Empress Dowager had brought up, so there was no need to worry about Northern Qi's greatest secret being leaked. Even in such a safe situation, the Northern Qi Emperor still held her hands behind her back and stared calmly into the snow. There was not a glimmer of weakness. Perhaps for her, dressing as a man had long been something that she did not need to put her heart into or hide. Rather, she had long seen herself as a man, an emperor. This kind of aura had long seeped into her flesh and blood and could not be separated. After Chen Pingping's death, there are only 3 people left in this world who have the right to place their pieces. A complicated expression reappeared on her face. The weather was slightly cold, and her cheeks were slightly red. However, there was no flirtatious feeling. On the contrary, there was a sense of killing. I had not thought that Chen Pingping would play such a game in the end, the Northern Qi Emperor's brows furrowed. She let out a breath of cold air and said, "Only now do I understand why the imperial advisor cared so much about Chen Pingping's life before he died." He had long seen that if he wanted to force Fan Xian and his cheap father to turn against each other, only Chen Pingping would make the final choice. I don't understand why Chen Pingping would do this. What kind of hatred could make him do this? She laughed coldly. Presumably, it has something to do with that woman from back then. Sea Lily slowly walked to her side and glanced at her worriedly. She handed over the small heater in her hand and quietly asked, "Does Fan Xian's list of 3 people also include him?" She was the granddaughter of the previous king of the Qin kingdom. Presently, she was the only favored imperial consortly in the Northern Qi royal palace. Her relationship with the Northern Qi emperor was closer than many people had guessed. They were partners, companions who had grown up together, and people they confided in. Earlier, the Qi emperor had said that after Chen Pingping's death, there were only 3 people who had the right to place their pieces. And Ping. Fan. The Northern Qi emperor gently stroked the slightly hot stove and sighed. He has a good mother and is hard on himself to have the power he has today. Don't underestimate his power. There are good things hidden in Dongyi. Hi, the Qi gently, the Qi, the Li, the Fan, the Emperor, he, the Qi, the Fan, the Fan, Dynasty, Fan, Li, and Long, the A, Fan, the Yun, he, Fan, E, the Fan, the Northern Qi Emperor faintly said. Just this alone proves that the power in Fan Xian's hands makes even the Qing Emperor afraid. It's so cold. Don't stand at the door to the palace. Sea Lily carefully looked at the Emperor's expression. From the corner of her eyes, she imperceptibly brushed across his abdomen wrapped in a large cloak. The Emperor was an intelligent and sensitive person. He immediately sensed her gaze. A glimmer of disgust immediately rose to his face. His cheeks tightened slightly. It was as if he was tightly gritting his teeth and suppressing his anger. Seeing the Emperor's expression, Sea Lily snorted and couldn't resist laughing out loud. I wonder what Sir Fan Jr. would think if he knew of your Majesty's current situation. That bastard is ruthless and powerful, but in his bones, he is a rotten scholar. The Northern Qi Emperor was merciless as he harshly criticized the man in the south. With a cold smile, he said, "How naive, childish, and muddle-headed the things he has done these few months. The situation has already developed to this point, yet he still hopes to resolve the problem within the Qin kingdom. He still wants fewer people to die so that this matter can come to an end. In the end, he has underestimated the Qin Emperor. Even if his old emperor is not a great grandmaster, how can his little tricks shake his position? He wants fewer people to die so that he can change the dynasty. This is truly preposterous to the extreme. The Northern Chi Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not listen to Sea Lily's words. Leaving the palace door where the wind and snow had just begun to rise, he coldly said, "If I don't help him this time, Dongyi and the Yenjing camp will face off. Regardless of who wins or loses, I want to see how he will continue to pretend to be a wealthy and idle person in Jingdo. Does your Majesty truly only want to help him defend Dongyi?" Sea Lily's eyes shifted slightly as she asked quietly. The Northern Chi Emperor's body froze slightly. It was as if he had not expected Sea Lily to see through his other plans at a glance. After a moment of silence, he said, "I am the master of Northern Qi. How can I harm my Qi army because of a man? Helping him is actually helping myself. If the Qing kingdom does not fall into chaos, the pressure on the Qi kingdom will be too great. Besides, the Qing emperor has always had thoughts of invading the north. Now that General Shang Shanhu is guarding the south, he will first test the waters and then control the center. With preparations, it will always be easier in the future. I'm just a bit worried about Shang Shanhu," Sea Lily replied with lowered brows. These words were not something a concubine in the back palace could say. However, as noble consortly, many times, she was more or less like the Northern Qi Emperor's strategist. The foreign enemy is powerful. Even if Shang Shanhu holds a grudge against me for working together with Fan Xian to kill Xiao En. The Northern Qi Emperor furrowed his brows slightly. As long as the Qing kingdom does not give up on invading the north, General Shang Shanhu will not forget the world because of a personal grudge. I am like this, and so is General Shang Shanhu. However, Sir Fan Jr. is already in a difficult situation in the south. Once the people of the Qing court see that General Shang Shanhu has sent out troops this time and the connection to Dongyi. A glimmer of worry flashed between Sea Lily's brows. She involuntarily began to worry for Fan Xian. Of the 3 women in Shangjing who had connections to Fan Xian, Haitang Duo was far away on the grasslands. The emperor in the palace was scheming and cold and emotionless. He probably didn't care much about Fan Xian's life or death. However, Sea Lily couldn't help but worry about the man who was sometimes warm and sometimes cold. I have never worried that the Southerners would see the true purpose of the South trip this time. This cannot be hidden for long. At least, those who know the true state of the Qing court and Dongyi will certainly be able to guess, the Northern Qi Emperor said coldly. Yenjing's Wang Jikuan will certainly be the first to guess. What is there to be afraid of guessing? Even if it gets out, there is no need to be afraid. Colluding with the Qi kingdom is a crime that even Fan Xian cannot bear. Hearing this, Sea Lily couldn't help but sigh faintly. So, your Majesty has never given up on forcing him to come to Shangjing. However, if it really reaches that step, will he be able to come back alive? The wind and snow chilled people and made their faces flush red. The Northern Qi Emperor looked at the wind and snow calmly and slowly said, "If he is alive but refuses to come, for me and for you, what difference is there from him being dead? Duo shouldn't know of this matter." Sea Lily raised her head and looked at her. Aunt Disciple is on the grasslands, and the people in Shiliang Road have all died. It is not convenient to contact her. The Northern Qi Emperor lowered his head and looked at the tips of his feet. He was silent for a long time. His right hand suddenly rose and trembled slightly. It was as if he wanted to touch his abdomen. However, he didn't do this action for a long time. His fingertips curled up slightly. Finally, a glimmer of a feminine expression appeared. Your Majesty, the military report has arrived. The officials are waiting in the closed pavilion. Outside the palace, an old eunuch urgently reported in a raspy voice. The South was currently at war with the Qing people. The military situation was tense. No one dared to make a mistake. For the first time, the northern Qi people discovered that their army had finally bravely launched the first attack. Their mood was much different than before. Hearing these words, the northern Qi emperor abruptly raised his head. The glimmer of gentleness in his eyes had long turned into a cold calm. Sea Lily quickly tied a gold and jade belt around the waist of her large, black robe. She walked toward the outside of the palace. Her footsteps were steady, and she displayed the bearing of an emperor. Leaving the depths of the palace, Sir Langtiao and Friar He were already waiting quietly outside. In the 10th year of the Qin calendar, Dongyi submitted to the Qin kingdom in name. The situation of the world was about to undergo an irreversible change. However, a rain in Jingdo at the beginning of autumn pulled the situation back. Regardless of whether or not Fan Xian, who was in the middle of the whirlpool, had such deep and far-sighted plans, at least the present Dongyi was, in reality, under his and the great prince's control. It had to be said that it was only at this moment that Sigurd-Jian's final order truly displayed its greatest effect. Of the 13 disciples of the Sword Hut, other than Yunjilan, who had become the master of Dongyi, the other 12, as well as the aces of the grandson generation, had all gathered under Fan Xian's command. Additionally, there were the 10,000 elite soldiers led by the Qin Kingdom's great prince and the 4,000 black knights Qin Pingping had left for Fan Xian. As long as Fan Xian and the great prince worked together smoothly, Dongyi would once again become an independent power. Regardless of how one looked at it, the trust and cooperation between Fan Xian and the great prince would not be broken so easily. This had already been well demonstrated during the Jingdo rebellion 3 years ago. After Sigurd-Jian's death, Dongyi maintained its independence. Presumably, this great grandmaster's spirit would also be pleased after his death. Other than Dongyi's own power, the key to achieving the present situation was the northern Qi military's sudden autumn attack in the 10th year of the Qin calendar. This attack had caused the northern Qi court to lose a great deal of power and rations. In the end, Shang Shanhu's miraculous hands had only coincidentally obtained a provincial city in the corner. It looked like the northern Qi people had lost more than they gained. Immediately after, northern Qi moved out and made it appear as if they were heading south in full force, forcing the Qin kingdom to prepare with all its might. A great battle seemed to be about to erupt next spring. This gave Dongyi and Fan Xian at least half a year of buffer time. Regardless of how the northern Qi emperor, disguised as a man, hid her inner thoughts in front of Sea Lily and only put the interests of the northern Qi court and people at the forefront, she could not convince herself otherwise. Everything she had done was largely because of that man in the Qin kingdom. He had competed with her for a number of years, cooperated with her for a number of years, and fought for a number of years. In the end, he had become her first and only man. When the news of the battle in the north reached Jingdo, it was already the beginning of winter. This year, Jingdo's weather was unusual. The autumn rain was even heavier. It was as if all the moisture in the sky had been pushed down. After winter, there were no clouds in the sky. It was bleak and cold, but there was no snow. Without the Overwatch Council, Baoyue Brothel's intelligence reports were, after all, marginal information. Fan Xian did not know the true inside story of the battle in the north. However, this did not stop him from analyzing it and coming to a conclusion close to the truth. Different from what Zhang Daodu had expected, the eruption of the battle did not make Fan Xian angry. In the end, he was not a true saint. He was just a normal person. He knew that the female emperor in the north was helping him, so it was difficult for him to be angry. He was just a bit gloomy. The reason for the gloominess between his brows was complicated. Perhaps it was because he had discovered that he had no way of influencing the thoughts of the northern Qi royal family. Even if he had their greatest weakness, she was, in the end, an emperor. She would have her own thoughts. Another reason was the attitude of the palace after this matter. Northern Qi invading, then retreating, not withdrawing, and preparing for war. These 4 consecutive attacks were all to help Dongyi take some of the pressure off. Any major figure with sharp eyes could see this. Thus, some people also understood Fan Xian's role in all of this. Although not many people understood this and it did not affect the discussions among the Qing people, the silence in the royal palace still caught Fan Xian by surprise. The major figures in the Qing kingdom were shocked by Fan Xian's influence and that he was able to have northern Qi send out troops to help, such as Duke Lu, who rarely came to the manor a few days ago. That night, Lady Lu's father, Duke Lu, who had been silent in court for many years but still had some power, spoke sincerely and earnestly with Fan Xian for an entire night. He was Lady Lu's biological father and could be considered Fan Xian's ancestor. Fan Xian had always been respectful to Duke Lane in the capital. Although this duke rarely left the manor, at critical moments, he always stood on Fan Xian's side. Although Fan Xian was silent in the face of his lecture, he did not refute it. As a soldier of the Qing kingdom, Duke Lu was shocked and fearful of the faint connection between the battle in the north and the Fan Manor. However, the matter could not be made clear, so the old man only came to the manor to warn Fan Xian and remind him. Even someone like Duke Lu, who did not care about worldly affairs, was beginning to fear the role Fan Xian might play. Why was the palace still so calm? Fan Xian did not believe that the emperor would be shocked by the strange changes in the north. He also did not believe that even if his powerful northern Qi aide was exposed in front of the emperor would feel some fear. The emperor needed a battle. How could he be afraid of northern Qi's invasion? However, this kind of quietness and silence was indeed unusual. The cold air gradually condensed. Jingdo's first snow finally floated down. The beginning of winter coincided with the winter solstice. Dumplings began to be cooked in large pots in various private residences in Jingdo. The business of slaughtering sheep in various shops was extremely good. The delicious taste of mutton soup seemed to rise from every corner of the streets. Prince Hiching's manor, which had been silent for a long time, opened its main doors wide. Honored guests had arrived, but it was still unable to be lively. The people who came were always the same. The imperial soldiers responsible for guarding outside Prince Hiching's manor watched the activity in various places with vigilant gazes. The purpose of these imperial soldiers was, to a greater extent, to guard this manor. The matter of the great prince defying the emperor's will and not returning to the capital had not been made public. Only a few officials in court knew that a prince leading an army outside had disobeyed an edict. This matter was extremely disgraceful. However, for the face of the court and the Li royal family, the court temporarily maintained its silence while the Yanjing camp was unable to enter Dongyi. No one was willing to relax their guard on Prince Hiching's manor. Fan Xian held Shunning's small hand and walked into Prince Hiching's manor with a face full of smiles. He walked side by side with Wang Fei toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Once Lin Wan entered the manor, she was pulled away by Yi Ling. No one knew what this pair of close friends were going to talk about. Sir Fan Jr. truly always has astonishing actions. Prince Hiching's face was without might. She was only tranquil. Presently, she was like a hostage and did not leave the manor for many years. Today was the rare winter solstice, yet, she had invited these young people in the most delicate situations in Jingdo. Fan Xian, his wife, Yi Ling, Princess Ro Jia, Prince Hiching's Wang Fei, and secondary Fei Wang Tong. This was already most of the people in the Qing royal family. Other than the third prince deep in the palace, the younger generation of the Li royal family had all gathered in the manor. Unfortunately, these young people's situations were not good. The great princess must be joking, Fan Xian replied evenly. If we are talking about the matter outside Sangzhou, I think you should know better than me that the young emperor in the north is not someone I can move. Wang Fei looked at him with a complicated expression and faintly said, it is precisely because I know my brother's personality that I don't understand how you were able to persuade him to send troops to help you. I think there is no need to bring this matter up, Fan Xian replied with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and replied, at least it is a good thing for the great prince far away in Dongyi. However, Wang Fei, you are alone in Jingdou. If there is anything inconvenient, please tell me. Wang Fei smiled slightly and bowed solemnly. Although the present situation was unpredictable, she knew that she had once made a mistake. She could not make such a mistake again. Her husband and the young man in front of her were already tied together in Dongyi. The Yanjing camp is pointing its sword at Dongyi. I wonder how Wang Tong feels in the matter. Fan Xian saw that shunning by his side could not walk anymore. He picked her up and asked Wang Fei. The little girl did not understand what the elders were talking about. She opened her large eyes curiously and looked back and forth between Fan Xian's and Wang Fei's faces. Although Tong Er's personality is a bit arrogant, she is, in reality, a naive and unaffected child. She just finds it a bit boring. Sometimes, when I ask her to go to the Yi Manor, she is overjoyed. She had thought of going to the Fan Manor to have a look. As you know, it is not convenient. I understand. Fan Xian smiled slightly and looked at Wang Fei. At the beginning, I had thought that with Wang Fei in the manor, the young lady of the Wang family would not have any problems. This is all because of you. Oh, right, Masuasua still does not have a status. She is getting older. A glimmer of sadness flashed through Wang Fei's brows. The great prince was far away in Dongyi, far away, fighting against the court as an equal. Her life as a hostage in Jingdou was wretched. Yet, there was still a childlike secondary Fei in the manor, as well as a naturally outspoken girl who did not understand the ways of the world. It made it difficult for her. Fan Xian sighed and said, how can I care about these things now? Although it was I, the official of Taichung Temple, who made this up, you and I both know that in the end, it was only the emperor's will. Having said this, it was pointless to say more. Coincidentally, the two of them had already crossed the wooden bridge over the lake and reached the center of the pavilion. The sides of the pavilion were all glass windows that let in the light but not the wind. There were a few heaters, and the air was like spring, making one feel comfortable. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the four girls talking together in the corner of the pavilion. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. One winter solstice, Fan Xian was summoned into the palace as the princess's son-in-law. Under the Empress Dowager's icy gaze, he ate a meal of mutton soup without much interest. It seemed that it was still that year when the great prince opened the manor to entertain guests. It was in this pavilion that, other than the crown prince, all of the young people of the Li royal family had come. The second prince had also come. Now, the Empress Dowager was dead, the second prince was dead, the crown prince was dead, and those who should have died and those who should not have died were all dead. There was only Fan Xian locked in Jingdou, the great prince separated from Dongyi, the third prince isolated in the palace, and these 5 girls. All of his descendants were secretly standing on the opposite side of him. Did he really think that he had it easy? Fan Xian couldn't help but think of the emperor in the palace. He stood in a daze at the entrance to the pavilion and was silent for a moment. The hot pot was sent in. Everyone ate the meal in silence, probably thinking of something in their hearts. Fan Xian sat by Rojia's side. Like a warm and amiable older brother, he asked about her well-being and helped her boil the mutton in her bowl. Of the girls in the pavilion, Rojia was probably the weakest and most pitiful. Although there were rumors in the palace that Prince Jing would return to his manor in a few days, thinking of a girl who had endured alone in Prince Jing's manor for months, Fan Xian couldn't help but feel pity for her. Without the servants in the pavilion, everyone spoke more casually. Even Wang Tong, who was cautious and unfamiliar with interest in her eyes, did not feel left out. Fan Xian rose to go to the corner of the pavilion to pick up some charcoal. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yi Ling follow him. "I know you care for Wang Tong Fan Xian said quietly as he stood and gazed at her. What would Wang Chan's future end be? Would she become a young widow like Yi Ling No one knew. Yi Ling sighed. She was no longer the charming girl who rode through the streets of Jingdou. "Teacher, are you just going to keep messing around with the emperor like this?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then said, "You're killing me with your questions. However, I'm afraid the emperor doesn't even have me in his eyes. In a few days, perhaps there will be news from the West. Help me ask around and see if there are any movements in the Bureau of Military Affairs. Father will not let me interfere in matters of politics. I'm not Sun Pin Yi Ling glared at him. Shortly after, her expression darkened slightly. "I don't know what you're doing. I just want to give you a piece of advice. P.S. Let's just say a few words. I'm still sick, dizzy, and uncomfortable. However, after finding out that I was third in last year's monthly votes ranking, I naturally became happy. I have to thank everyone, because this is the monthly votes that everyone cast. Thank you so much. Also, I must thank third young Master Tang. A long time ago, third young Master Tang reminded me about the annual rankings. That's why I've been working hard to get votes since July, and thanks to everyone's love and help, I've managed to get into the top 3. Top 3, right? If I'm wrong, then I've really dropped a lot. I heard that third place is the Australian and Singapore duo. I want to ask thee about this and see if I can get a discount." Chapter 725. The things that need to be said have already been said by many people. There's no need to say anything more. Fan Xian smiled and patted Yi Ling's shoulder. Between the two of them, there was never anything to worry about. Yi Ling did not raise her brows out of habit. On the contrary, the expression on her face dimmed slightly. "There are always discussions in the family that burrow into my ears. Although I don't want to hear these things, Father is very angry about what happened in the north." She looked at Fan Xian, wanting to say something but then stopped. A moment later, she said seriously, "After all, you and I are both Qing people." Fan Xian nodded and didn't say anything, but his smile was slightly bitter. After the member of the Qinian unit he had sent to Dongyi met with Mu Feng, he passed on his will, causing the turmoil in the Liang kingdom to reignite. From there, he thought of a way to resist the court's edict and allow the great prince to stay in Dongyi. However, Northern Qi's reaction was truly beyond Fan Xian's expectations. Calculating the time, Wang Qinian should have just arrived in Shangjing. In the message he had him bring, there was no intention for Northern Qi to send out a large number of troops. He only asked the little emperor to help Dongyi for the sake of their relationship. There were many ways to help. Northern Qi's method was, without question, the most open and honorable. It was also the kind that put Fan Xian in the most awkward position. He broke free from his thoughts. As he picked at the coal, he quietly chatted with Yi Ling. He wanted to understand from the bits and pieces of conversation in the Yi manner whether or not there was any movement from the Bureau of Military Affairs. The emperor's reaction to the northern battle was too indifferent. It was so indifferent that Fan Xian smelled a glimmer of danger. However, he didn't know where this scent landed. A few days after the winter solstice, the Fan Manor held another family banquet. This time, the family banquet was not like Prince Hiqing's manor, where the younger generation of the royal family were invited. It was a pure family banquet. Other than the master of the manor, the only guests were Fan Xian's 4 disciples. Yang Wanli had been thrown into prison from his position as Vice Minister of the Ministry of Works. He had received heavy punishment in prison. After the Supreme Court's verdict, he had been taken back to the manor by Fan Xian to recover. Even now, it was difficult for him to move. The resentful expression on his face had long faded. He just sat quietly to the right. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, the one who climbed the fastest was Qing Jialin. He had already become the Suzhou Zhizhou. Now that he had been implicated by Fan Xian, he had also tragically fallen from power. The 2 great crimes the palace had given him of visiting prostitutes and invading the mausoleum were truly too severe. He was forcefully taken back to the capital. During this month, Fan Xian had rushed back and forth for him. He had exhausted a great deal of energy. Finally, he had saved his life, but he had also lost his position. It seemed that he had no future. Qing Jialin sat below Yang Wanli listlessly, sighing. There were 2 tables in the flower hole. The women were all at the table behind the screen. Only Fan Xian and Yang Qing sat at the table outside. They did not move their chopsticks. They were waiting for someone. There were 2 tables in the flower hole. The women were all at the table behind the screen. Only Fan Xian and Yang Qing sat at the table outside. They did not move their chopsticks. They were waiting for someone. Outside the flower hall, snowflakes floated lightly in the Fan Manor's garden, waiting for the people who had returned. It was Shi Chanli, who had left the Qing kingdom these years to carry out Fan Xian's will and unify the brothels under the sky. Shi Chanli entered the hall. He didn't even brush off the snow on his body before he first bowed deeply to Fan Xian in the main seat. He then bowed to his teacher's wife through the screen. Only then did he turn around. Looking at Yang Wanli and Qing Jialin, he laughed bitterly and went forward to hug these 2 friends he hadn't seen in a long time. Presently, he and Sang Wen were in charge of Baoyue brothel together, so he knew most of the news under heaven. He also knew of the tragic encounters these 2 friends had had in the past few months. Everything needed no words. Just a hug was enough to express the feelings of separation and comfort. You're not feeling well, so don't get up. Shi Chanli very consciously sat below Qing Jialin and spoke to Yang Wanli, who was about to get up and speak. Although he was now one of the wealthiest merchants in the world and could be considered a hero no matter where he was, the habits he had developed from wholeheartedly studying the books of sages had not changed. In particular, the regret in the depths of his heart made him naturally envious of the experiences of Yang Wanli, Qing Jialin, and Ho Jichang. He also thought that as a merchant, he should sit at the very bottom. Yang Wanli and Qing Jialin met each other's eyes and smiled bitterly. They couldn't be bothered with this pedantic fellow. They turned their heads and chatted idly. No one talked about their tragic encounters these few months. No one went to criticize the court wantonly because they didn't want their teacher, Fan Xian, to worry about these things. After waiting for a while, no one came again. The expressions of the people at the table began to become awkward and ugly. Qing Jialin looked at Fan Xian's slightly focused expression and muttered, "Perhaps it's because the snow is heavy and they were delayed on the road." Yang Wanli pressed his lips tightly together and sighed. He picked up the wine cup in front of him and drained it in one gulp. Shi Chanli glanced at Fan Xian with confusion and said, "According to the news I received, Jichang should have returned to the capital 7 days ago. However, the court did not convict him and just let him be." Fan Xian raised his brows and smiled. It is the end of the year. Many officials and colleagues have banquets and invitations. It is normal for them to not be able to come in time. Although he said this, he still couldn't help but feel gloomy. Ho Jichang had returned to the capital a few days ago, but he had not come to Fan Manor to visit. The spies in the court had also gotten wind of this. It seemed that the palace had no intention of punishing him. All of this already made it clear. In such a country, betraying one's teacher for glory was not unheard of. However, Fan Xian still did not feel good in his heart when it happened to him. His gaze slowly swept across the faces of the three people at the table. A complicated emotion rose in his heart. Shi Chanli was originally still in the Song Kingdom. This time, he had taken the risk to come back to the capital to see him. There was no need to mention Yang Wanli. Fan Xian had always thought that Qing Jialin, who had already become the Suzhou Zhizhou, had a weak personality and was not very trustworthy. Unexpectedly, he would rather have his position taken away than betray him. Unexpectedly, Ho Jichang did not come. I heard that Scholar He's manor is also holding a banquet today. Shi Chanli's expression was a bit ugly. Before you came to the capital, the two of them were known as the leading scholars of Jingdou and once had some personal friendship. Yang Wanli gritted his teeth and said in a dark and angry voice, "What a Jichang." He abandoned darkness for light quickly. When I see him another day, I must give him a good sigh of praise. These words were sarcasm. Qing Jialin could only smile bitterly. A moment later, he sighed faintly and said, "Back in the Tongfu Inn, Jichang told me that even when Sir Fan Jr. was walking, he should not notice the rainwater on his umbrella dripping into the oil pan of the peddlers. Such a person who loved the people was the one we should follow." Who would have thought that he... After a sigh, Fan Xian smiled. Calling for the three of them to start eating, he said, "Everyone has their own aspirations. Besides, I am unable to work in court. Jichang wants to work for the people. It is normal for him to be closer to Scholar He." His words were calm. No one could see the coldness in his heart. Fan Xian actually knew that of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, the one he had favored the most was Ho Jichang. However, the affairs of the world were strange. He didn't know if something had gone wrong with Fan Xian's arrangements or if it was a matter of luck. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Yang Wanli had done a meritorious service in repairing the dikes. Qing Jialin had sat in the position of Suzhou Zhizhou at a young age. He was also one of the 7 gentlemen of the New Deal that the emperor had personally summoned into the palace. Although Shi Chanli had not entered officialdom, his identity as the owner of Baoyue brothel was glorious. Only Ho Jichang remained in Jiaozhou and was unable to fulfill the ambitions in his heart. Now that Fan Xian had lost all power, Sir Ho was probably dissatisfied and was forced to find other ways. It was not that Fan Xian did not understand this. He was just unhappy, particularly unhappy at Scholar He, who was also holding a banquet. After 3 rounds of wine, they chatted about the things they had done in their positions these years. Yang Wanli talked about how the shining white silver had become the huge rocks and earth on either side of the Yangtze River. Qing Jialin talked about how he had protected the border and people as Zhizhou, how he had used Sir Fan Jr.'s help to take care of the salt merchants and royal merchants, how he had helped his teacher's wife raise money to enter the Hangzhou conference, and how many poor commoners he had helped. Shi Chanli smiled as he talked about what he had seen and heard under heaven, as well as the slightly better lives of the miserable women in the brothels. He also told an interesting story. It was said that in the back of some Baoyue brothels, there was a statue of Sir Fan Jr. worshipping Sir Fan Jr. because he had protected the lives and safety of many girls. After these words were said, everyone other than Shi Chanli spat out their wine. Although the 3 of them were chatting about their own matters, they were all related to Fan Xian. They talked about some of the things Fan Xian had done in his life that were beneficial to the country and the people. Fan Xian was not a saint. He was only a mortal, so he was a bit happier. He smiled and looked at the 3 of them. After a moment, he said, "Wanli has been living in the manor these days. In any case, he doesn't have a proper home in Jingdou. Jialin, your family is still in Suzhou, so you might as well move into the manor." Once their teacher spoke, the three of them fell silent at the same time. They put down the chopsticks in their hands and looked at him. I have made arrangements for the Suzhou family matters. Don't worry, Fan Xian looked at Qing Jialin and said warmly. Just get through this period of time. I called you here today because I was afraid that you would have resentment toward the court and me and harm yourselves. He laughed bitterly and said, of course, looking at it now, I don't need to worry about Jichang's side. But you know that I don't ask anything of you except for those 8 words. So even if the imperial court wants to find evidence of my crimes from you, it's impossible. Jichang has his own considerations, but I don't think he will betray me out of nothing. Fan Xian's expression calmed. He slowly said, the 4 of you followed me to be officials under heaven. That was a time of peace, so I needed your efforts. Presently, the world is not at peace, so I needed you to endure silently. I know you want to help me, so I have privately gone to find some colleagues I am on good terms with. In the future, don't do this. My matters are not problems that the officials of the court can solve. Qing Jialin smiled bitterly and agreed. They all remembered clearly the 8 words Fan Xian had left them when they had been sent out. Be good people and be good officials. Since I can't be an official, then be an honest person. There was a hidden pain between Fan Xian's brows. The emperor had knocked everyone by his side into the dust. He had truly made him look left and right and was badly battered. This move was truly too vicious. After the family banquet, Yang Wanli and Qing Jialin went to the residence in the back garden to rest. Fan Xian left Shi Chanli behind. He had traveled thousands of miles to summon Shi Chanli back to the capital not for something as simple as a meal. There were only the 2 of them left in the study. Shi Chanli no longer had to hide anything. He angrily cursed Ho Jichang. Fan Xian shook his head and said, in the end, Jichang is only a scholar and an official. Even though he has just learned to curry favor, how could he know that he has made a big mistake? Shi Chanli's heart chilled. He knew too many of his teacher's secrets. He knew that his teacher was not just a simple powerful official. His teacher's power was beyond his position of power. Ho Jichang's betrayal had, in reality, angered a ruler in the dark. Don't worry that I will kill him. I don't have the leisure to do that. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly. How is the matter I had you investigate? There are no abnormalities in Dongyi or the north. There is no conflict with the flames of war on the surface, Shi Chanli added. He then replied seriously to Fan Xian's question. The matter of Gong Dian leaving the capital is indeed strange. The Bureau of Military Affairs sent a transfer order to Nanzhao 2 months ago. However, the level of secrecy is very high. The tower has only gotten wind of it. Without the cooperation of the council, a lot of the information can only be touched on the surface. Nanzhao. What's wrong there? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked. Commander Ye's son is on the front lines in Nanzhao. According to court practice, there is currently no fighting in Nanzhao. The new master has already succeeded the throne for 3 years. That border army should be halfway back to the capital to report. Shi Chanli glanced at him and continued. Based on the time, they should have already arrived in Jingdo to see the emperor and then returned to the various camps. However, that border army still has not arrived. You mean, they might have gone west? Fan Xian's heart jumped. He suddenly thought of a terrifying possibility. He shook his head and said, how could such a large movement of military power be hidden from everyone? If we had focused our attention on the south at the beginning, even if it was the southern front of Weizhou, with Wu Mei's help, perhaps we would have been able to find some movement, Shi Chanli said with self-blame. However, Baoyue Brothel has been paying attention to Jingdo, Dongyi, and northern Qi these few months. We haven't sorted through the intelligence reports there carefully enough. It has nothing to do with you. That's what I'm focusing on. Fan Xian rubbed his temples with a headache and said to himself, Yiling, Er's brother, that bastard is not in Jingdo for a long time. I'd forgotten there was such a person. Based on the time, if the Nanzhao border army had truly turned back and passed Jingdo without entering, if they had truly gone west, wouldn't they have already reached Dingzhou? Fan Xian raised his head and took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with unease and tiredness. He knew he had made a big mistake. However, he had been under house arrest in Jingdo and the Overwatch Council was under Yan Bingyun's watch. It was indeed impossible to accurately grasp the movements of the Qin Kingdom's military power just by relying on Baoyue brothel. Gong Dian left the capital and went to Dingzhou to summon Crown Prince Hongqing back to the capital. He took with him 10,000 Jingdo garrison and 2,000 imperial soldiers, Shi Chanli reminded him. This is something that was discovered earlier. I know that. A feeling of defeat rose in Fan Xian's heart. His palm gently slapped the desk and sighed. I just did not think that the emperor would be so generous. He actually moved troops from the far south and crossed thousands of li. The army changed defenses. Is he not afraid that the world will fall into chaos? Hearing these words, Shi Chanli's body froze. He forced himself to calm down and analyze. For the court, the new Nanzhao ruler is young, and there are many powerful officials in the country who are inclined toward the Qin kingdom. There is no need to be on guard. It is enough to leave half of the army in the south. As for Yanjing and the northern camp situation in dealing with northern Qi in Dongyi, although it looks like it is because of the aftermath of the rebellion and the fact that the northern camp does not have a commander, in reality, there is no danger. Thus, for the emperor, as long as he can pacify Xiliang and there is no more cause for chaos, he can fully prepare for the northern expedition. To pacify Xiliang, we have to deal with the people on the grasslands. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed gently. He knew that he had been completely calculated by the emperor. In the end, he had not escaped the emperor's grasp. An indescribable sense of tiredness and disappointment filled his body. It made him sit woodenly in the chair, unable to move. He finally knew why the emperor maintained such an indifferent attitude toward the battle in the north. He was not angry or wary at all because of the possible collusion between northern Qi and Fan Xian. The emperor had long sorted out the possible actions of his illegitimate child and had focused all of his attention and power on the west. The emperor did not dance with Fan Xian's plans. On the contrary, he took advantage of the situation and smashed his fist viciously toward Dingzhou. We must immediately inform the crown prince, Shi Chanli said with a pale expression. Fan Xian sat tiredly in the chair. A moment later, he said, It's too late. A chill pervaded the grasslands in winter. The wind came from the north and passed through the North Sea, carrying with it some moisture. It had long been wiped clean in the barren deserts to the northeast of the grasslands. It was dry and cold. The autumn grass on the ground had long disappeared. What was left was only sand and frozen earth that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was so hard that even the hooves of the horses felt uncomfortable. If it had been a winter in the past, birds looking down from the sky might have been able to find some moving and alluring green beside some lakes. Today, they couldn't even find these pitiful habitats. The eyes of these cold-resistant birds, who did not want to go to the south for the winter, were completely red. The frozen and dried grass was blood red. The round gravel was blood red. The sand that crumbled with a pinch was blood red. Even the bodies of the voles that crawled out of their caves seemed to be blood red. This was the mouth of Hong Mountain, a place one had to pass to enter the Qin territory from the grasslands. The mountain rocks were all red. However, the red today was not a strange color bestowed by the heavens. It was dyed red by the Hu people on the grasslands and the Qing soldiers. There were corpses and fresh blood everywhere. The earth-shaking battle cries that had startled the voles out of their caves and startled the birds into the sky had gradually stopped. However, cruel battles were still going on beside some barren hills. Some stubbornly resisting Hu tribe warriors had gathered into a few small circles. Under the siege of the Qing soldiers, who outnumbered them 10-1, they shed the last of their blood. A year ago, the Dingzhou general, King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing, had received the Black Knights and Fan Xian who had escaped from the grasslands at the mouth of Hong Mountain. At the time, he had hoped to be able to carry out a beautiful ambush here. However, the Hu people were not stupid. They never gave the Qing army such an opportunity. If it had been in the past, in such a cold season, the countless tribes of Shihu would have followed the banner of the king's tent and slowly avoided the cold air. They would have advanced deeper into the grasslands until they reached the foot of the mountain that could not be climbed. After they had endured the bitter cold of this year, they would once again cover the grasslands in the early spring of the second year. Shihu rarely chose to launch an attack on the Qing kingdom's Xiliang road in the middle of winter. In the past, other than tribes that had lost power in the fighting on the grasslands and would crazily try to cross the border to steal the winter rations of the Qing kingdom's soldiers and civilians, there had never been a major military operation. This year was different. For some reason, Sir Hugu, who had inherited most of the left virtuous prince's cattle and sheep warriors, suddenly led his tribe to the east and bravely, or rather recklessly, launched an attack on Qing kingdom's territory. What confused the Shihu people even more was that the great chief, the far-sighted chief, expressed his approval of Hu Ji's actions after thinking for a day and night in the king's tent. He then braved the bitter cold to send out the most elite grasslands iron riders in an attempt to pass through the mouth of Hong Mountain, go around Qingzhou, and directly attack the interior of Xiliang. No one would have thought that in the wilderness near the mouth of Hong Mountain, there would be 20,000 Qing iron riders and 70,000 Dingzhou soldiers lying in ambush. These Qing soldiers seemed to have long known the direction of the Hu people's attack on the grasslands, the number of people attacking, and the time of the attack. Most terrifyingly, they had predicted that Shihu would brave the bitter cold to attack this year. The Hu people's attack was completely unreasonable, and the Qing army's ambush was even more unreasonable. When these unreasonable things were put together, they created the great Qingzhou victory that would be recorded in the history books. This was a battlefield where tens of thousands of people sacrificed their lives. The side of a barren hill was already filled with corpses. Fresh blood flowed through the sand. This group of Hu tribe warriors had fought to the last man and were surrounded by the Qing army. From the earlier battle, the Qing military officer knew that this person was one of the few aces on the grasslands. Thus, he stopped urging his subordinates forward. Instead, he slowly raised his right hand and coldly prepared to shoot. "Are you surrendering or not?" A cold voice echoed through the cold grasslands air. Hu Gu, covered in wounds, breathed heavily. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the Qing soldiers. Suddenly, he let out a loud cry and stabbed his knife into his chest, so deep that the hilt disappeared. Hu Gu died, but his eyes were still open, looking hatefully at the sky. Even if he died, he would become a resentful spirit and ask the young man in Jingdou who had caused all of this without reason and bloodshed why. Why was all of this? Chapter 726. In the cold sky, an eagle was flying. It was not afraid of the arrows of the humans below. Fearlessly, it glided down. Gliding across the battlefield that stretched for several li, it clearly saw the bodies of the Hu tribe soldiers who had died under the enemy's knives, spears, and crossbows. The fresh blood that gradually seeped into the sand and red earth, as well as the stimulating smell of iron and blood. The Qing army that had set up an ambush at the mouth of Hong Mountain began to clean up the battlefield and organize their formations. Even the most elite Dingzhou army had paid a heavy price in a great battle with the grassland's main force. The eagle flapped its wings and flew a little higher. Then, it was alarmed to discover that a group of Qing light cavalry had silently attacked from the direction of the Shituhai meadow in the northeast. There were at least 4,000 people in this group. Following the natural rise and fall of the sand dunes and meadow, they silently advanced into the depths of the grasslands. A strange cry was heard as the goshawk seemed to have sensed the cavalry's killing intent and fearsome aura, so it flew higher into the cold clouds. After flying for an unknown period of time, it finally broke through the clouds and zoomed toward a small hill beside a lake. There were thousands of grassland Shihu soldiers on this small hill. Mixed among them were some northern warriors who had moved from the snowy plains in the north. However, this group of soldiers were clearly people who had escaped with great difficulty from the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain earlier. Their morale was very low, and many of them were already injured. Chief Su Bida's lips were dry, but there was no blood on his body. He looked coldly in the direction of the mouth of Hong Mountain in the distance. He knew that the Dingzhou army there was reorganizing and would not be able to rush over in a short amount of time. Presumably, the Qing people would not go deep into the grasslands in pursuit. He glanced at the warriors of the court around him. Seeing the injuries on their bodies, he thought of the great battle at the entrance of Hong Mountain. His eyes grew cold. Once the grasslands entered winter, they rarely used soldiers. This was something that Shihu and the Qing kingdom were already used to. The biggest reason was that the weather was cold and the ground was frozen. They had no supplies, so it was difficult for the Hu people to use their methods of coming and going like the wind and leaving like lightning. This winter, the chief had listened to Hu Jiyi's suggestion and gathered the most elite knights in his hands to begin an attack on Shiliang Road. It appeared to be an unwise choice, particularly with the wretched situation at hand. It seemed to further prove this point. But who was Chief Su Bida? 30 years ago, the Chanyu royal court, which was declining day by day, produced a person like him. He was able to survive and grow stronger in the cracks between the left and right virtuous princes, and he wisely accepted the barbarian cavaliers from the snow and ice in the north. He broadened his mind and absorbed the people from the central plains into his court. If it weren't for this era, if the eastern continent didn't have so many outstanding people, Chief Su Bida would have undoubtedly grown into a wise ruler of the grasslands, a figure whose might shook the world. How could he make such a low-level mistake? Su Bida's gaze pierced through the hill and landed on the Hu woman on the horse at the top of the hill. His expression became extremely complicated and downcast. Chief Su Bida had his own way of thinking as to why he had chosen to take the risk of attacking Shiliang Road in the cold of winter. He knew that the Qing court was currently in internal chaos. The emperor and his most favored officials were in a cold war. As for Hu Gu, the corners of the chief's eyes narrowed slightly. Like an eagle, he gazed in the direction of the distant Hong Mountain Pass. He thought to himself that Hu Gu, who dared to betray the grasslands and collude with the Overwatch Council, should already be dead. What a stupid person. How many of those who came into contact with the Overwatch Council could live smoothly? In this year, the chief Yu had already investigated what Hu Gu had relied on to rise up on the grasslands. Thus, he guessed why Hu Gu would choose such a winter to attack Shiliang Road. Chief Su Bida cared a great deal about the political rumors in Jingdou. With just a little calculation, he guessed that it must have something to do with Sir Fan Jr., who had lost power. The last time Fan Xian entered the grasslands, he had cleaned out most of the spies the grasslands had sent out. The power of the court had been severely damaged. In the end, Fan Xian had still managed to escape with a few hundred black knights right under the chief's nose. This reality made Su Bida feel endless humiliation. Particularly each time he looked at Songji Xianling, this humiliation was even harder to bear. This winter, Hu Jiyi's fake attack on Shiliang Road was an opportunity for the chief. After a long conversation with Songji Xianling, he rejected the princess' suggestion for him to be cautious. Instead, he wanted to use this opportunity to beat Fan Xian at his own game. Using the momentum of Fan Xian wanting to use foreign troops to help the position of the Dingzhou general, he gathered the power of the grasslands and attacked Xiliang decisively. This was a clever plan. Presumably, the Dingzhou general, Li Hongqing, had also received Fan Xian's news and thought that Hu Gu was faking an attack. He would not have expected the chief to take advantage of the situation and launch a large-scale attack, catching them off guard. Who would have thought that there would be more than 100,000 Qing elite soldiers gathered around the mouth of Hong Mountain? This was a most shameless ambush. After this battle, Hu Gu had been ambushed and killed. The court and the right virtuous prince's troops had suffered heavy casualties. At least 20,000 strong grassland soldiers had lost their lives on the Red Earth. Thinking of the pain of the battle earlier, the chief's eyes narrowed even more, and his heart grew colder. He squeezed his horse's belly and came to Songji Xianling's side. In an icy voice, he said, "You said that he was only borrowing the grassland soldiers to help Li Hongqing stabilize his position." Haitang Duo did not turn around. The fur coat on her body shivered in the cold wind. As the chief, such a risky gamble should never have been made. I have never truly trusted him. However, I think this time has nothing to do with him. He is just a pitiful pawn that has been killed by someone else. The two of them fell silent at the same time. To be able to clearly calculate Fan Xian's response and the Hu people's strategy of beating them at their own game, and to have planned it long ago, resulting in a crushing defeat the grasslands had not experienced in 30 years, there could only be one person in the Qing kingdom with such great foresight and eyes on the world. In front of the Qing emperor, it seemed that all of the scheming were just the prelude to the killing move in his chess game. The eagle finally landed on Su Bida's cold outstretched arm. The sky was cold and the ground was frozen. After flying in the cold clouds for a while, the animal shivered in the cold. The color of the feathers on its body appeared particularly dim. Su Bida's pupils constricted. In a low voice, he said, "There are thousands of light riders coming from the northeast." He said in a cold voice, "The Qing people are planning something big this time. I don't know which general dared to send another powerful army deep into the grasslands after this battle. In such cold weather, do these Qing people still have the extravagant hope of capturing the court in one fell swoop?" Although he said this, the chief was still shocked at the valiance of the Qing army and the determination they displayed to destroy everything. Although there were still thousands of grassland men around the lake, they had just experienced a great battle and were tired and low. If they were to face the 4,000 light riders who had been accumulating power for a long time in a head-on charge, victory or defeat would be obvious. Su Bida viciously cursed the Qing people for being despicable. They did not give him any chance to rest. As a king, he did not allow his angry emotions to destroy his reason. In the first instant, he had already sent out a warning to his subordinates at the bottom of the hill. Immediately, the court warriors around the lake immediately began to move. They moved quickly. It was impossible to see their earlier injuries and low moods. "Are you going with me?" The chief turned his horse's head and turned his head to glance at the Hu tribe woman on the hill. "I'm going to the Qing kingdom." Haitang Duo lowered her head slightly. Her eyes never left the mouth of Hong Mountain. Her expression was calm, but her voice revealed a glimmer of self-blame and self-reflection. She could see countless resentful spirits rising up in that direction. Because of Hu Ji's trust in a certain person, her trust in a certain person, and the chief's trust in her, tens of thousands of soldiers on the grasslands had been surrounded by the Qing Iron Riders. There were heavy casualties. Broken limbs and heads littered the ground like dead wood in a rotting swamp. This hellish scene on the battlefield made even her heart waver involuntarily. Only in that moment did the present leader of Tianyi Dao realize that, among thousands of soldiers and horses, one person's power was actually very small and could not change anything. I want an explanation. If I can't, I have to give you, as well as these people who died, an explanation. After Haitang finished speaking, she gently squeezed her horse's belly and turned into a streak of light smoke. Riding down the hill, she headed in the opposite direction of the sun. The words Fan Xian had asked Hong Yiqing to bring to her had already been delivered. Because of the matter between Xiliang and the grasslands, Haitang could not leave at the moment. At this moment, she had to go to Jingdou. Chief Su Beta didn't turn his head to look at the streak of dust again. With a stern cry, he led his remaining soldiers and advanced deeper into the grasslands. He believed that as long as he returned to his true home, the Qing light riders leaping at him like wolf cubs would no longer be a threat to him. In the west of the grasslands, of the 10,000 northern man iron riders who only obeyed Songji Xianling, 7,000 were still alive and waiting for him. Compared to the strange battle in the north of the mainland, the battle in Xiliang Road between the Qing kingdom and the Hu people was, without a doubt, more far-reaching and important in history. The beginning of this battle was actually a series of orders Fan Xian had the Qinian unit send out in a small courtyard in Jingdou that had been bought for over 100 liang of silver. It was because of these orders that Hu Gu led the left virtuous prince's old subordinates and pretended to launch an attack against Xiliang Road. Chief Su Beta's hawk-like eyes saw the relationship between Hu Gu and the Overwatch Council's Fan Xian and took advantage of the situation to act. Unexpectedly, all of this was within the Dingzhou military's expectations. The large net at the mouth of Hong Mountain had reaped countless Hu lives. After this battle, the left virtuous prince's troops were completely wiped out. The court and right virtuous prince's troops suffered heavy losses and lost all their prestige. The various tribes on the grasslands began to grow restless. Chief Su Beta's budding ambition to establish a country with the help of northern Qi's Tianyi Dao, Songji Xianling, was shattered. For decades, the grasslands would be in chaos. There would be no opportunity for unification. The great defeat of Shihu in this battle had far-reaching effects. History called it the Qingzhou Great Victory. Other than the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain, there was another important reason for the endless unrest on the grasslands. It was the 4,000 light riders that had been discovered by the Eagle. A young general had planned the entire battle of the Dingzhou army ambushing the elite Shihu troops. Furthermore, this general had abruptly left the battlefield at the mouth of Hong Mountain the moment the battle began. As the commander, he led the 4,000 light riders hidden in the east and launched a continuous half-year chase toward the remaining soldiers of the court. This chase was carried out in the ice and snow and galloped across the wasteland. Regardless of whether it was the pursuers or the deserters, they all lived unusually cruel lives. In the end, this chase had beaten Chief Su Beta until he lost all of his courage. No matter what, he was unable to make contact with the 7,000 northern man iron riders scattered in the far west. Passing through winter, spring, wind, snow, and long grass, this jaw-dropping chase continued for 5 months. When the last remaining strength of the chief's court finally made contact with the last 7,000 iron riders Haitang Duo had left on the grasslands, the brave and heroic Qing light riders finally withdrew from the grasslands. In the 5 months on the grasslands, this group of only 4,000 light riders burned, killed, and plundered along the way. They destroyed countless Hu tribes. Using iron-blooded methods and discipline, they maintained a difficult chase through the grasslands. By the time they returned to Qingzhou in the spring of the second year, there were only 800 of the 4,000 left. The commander of this group of iron riders that had completely changed the situation in the west of the Qing kingdom and completely dispelled any thoughts of Shihu invading the central plains was actually the commander of the Qingzhou victory. As a high-ranking general who should have been in the tent giving orders, he had bravely lowered his rank and entered the grasslands in pursuit. Other than the Qing emperor's meticulous planning, this young general was the truly powerful figure in the Qingzhou victory. Chief Su Bida's defeat at his hands was not undeserved at all. This young general was called Yuan. He was the eldest son of Commander Yi Zhong, head of the Bureau of Military Affairs in the Qing Kingdom, and the brother of second Wangfei Yiling. He was the person who had left the Dingzhou army at the age of 17 and gone to the front lines in Nanzhao. While Yuan was holding down the fort in Qingzhou and commanding the deployment of the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain, killing the Hu people until they cried out for heaven and earth, the highest military commander in Xiliang Road in name, General Li Hongqing, was under house arrest in the general's manor in Dingzhou. Also in the manor with him was Gong Dian, who had left his position as commander of the imperial army and had come to Dingzhou to take over. Military reports from Qingzhou flowed endlessly into the general's manor. Gong Dian and Li Hongqing sat on two sides, silently looking at the military reports and not saying a word. The troops entering battle near Qingzhou were basically the headquarters of the Dingzhou army in Xiliang Road. They were all border soldiers born and raised there. The Yi family had operated here for decades. Other than the great prince's expedition to the west, where he was still able to leave some influence, the Yi family was like the emperor of the Dingzhou army. Presently, the emperor had moved the eldest son of the Yi family back to Dingzhou to lead these old Dingzhou soldiers in a ferocious attack. Of course, there was no problem in cooperating. The half of the Nanzhao border army that made Fan Xian's heart tremble did not actually surge into Dingzhou as he had imagined. Instead, it stopped in the north of the Tsang Mountains to the west of Jingdou. Then, it chose one of them to enter Dingzhou. There were not many of them, but it was enough to control the general's manor. The handover of military power in Dingzhou was not actually a handover of soldiers. It was just a handover of generals. The eldest son of the Yi manor entered Dingzhou. With the cooperation of the imperial army and other powers led by Gong Dian, he easily took military power from Li Hongqing's hands. If everything had gone according to Fan Xian's plan, if there had not suddenly been a young general, Yuan, who used soldiers like a god and the Dingzhou army saw as their own, then when Hu Gul led his people to attack, Li Hongqing could have taken the opportunity to keep him in office for another year and a half. It was very quiet in the general's manor. After a long silence, Li Hongqing calmly said, "When it comes to marching and fighting, I am not as good as Yuan." Gong Dian raised his head and glanced at him. A moment later, he replied in a raspy voice, "Yuan grew up in the Dingzhou army. From the age of 3, he had practiced martial arts on horseback and controlled battle formations. However, he was impetuous in his youth. He resented his father forcefully suppressing his achievements, so he abandoned Dingzhou and joined Nanzhao. No wonder there is so little news of this person in the capital." Li Hongqing nodded. Gong Dian sighed and said, "Back then, Commander Yi suppressed his achievements because he was too young and had too much military service. He was afraid it would arouse fear." After all, the old Qin master's eldest son had died a violent death in the camp. Qin Heng was also not as good as him. Li Hongqing looked at the military report in front of him and shook his head. Commander Yi is well aware of the art of blending with the light. No wonder he was able to hide such an outstanding son for so long. The Dingzhou army's wish in this life is to pacify Shihu. Gong Dian was also a general from the Dingzhou army. He gazed at Li Hongqing and said, "It is only right and proper to be loyal to the emperor. Regardless of what the world thinks of the Dingzhou army, for the benefit of the emperor and the Qin kingdom, we are willing to do anything." Li Hongqing laughed bitterly. He knew these words were referring to Yiling's marriage to the second prince. In the end, the Dingzhou army had changed sides during the Jingdou rebellion, giving the second prince the heaviest blow. "I don't know what Fan Xian has said to you in private, but if this time, he led in the enemy to invade just to protect your position as general. Gong Dian's eyes narrowed. Coldness surged. I find Fan Xian's actions shameful. Li Hongqing raised his face and gazed calmly at Gong Dian. Who do you think I am? Who is Fan Xian? Since I dared to have Hugo come, I have my ways. Even if Yuan hadn't come, do you think I would have let the Hu people take advantage of me? In the end, it is something that hasn't happened. There is still room to turn around, Gong Dian said. I think the Emperor must be extremely disappointed in Sir Fan Jr. He paused and then continued, after the Crown Prince returns to Jingdo, please help me take a message to Sir Fan Jr. I have always admired him, but this time, I am somewhat disappointed. A man is born between heaven and earth. How can he use the blood of soldiers as a bargaining chip? Li Hongqing took a deep breath and gazed at Gong Dian with a not quite there smile. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, in the end, you still don't understand Fan Xian. If he was truly a person who built his success on tens of thousands of bones, if he truly did not care about the lives of Qing soldiers, then the Qing kingdom would probably have long become a tattered shirt riddled with holes. No matter how great and astute the Emperor is, how could he stop him from ripping apart this shirt from the inside? You underestimate his ability. You also underestimate his character. Gong Dian was silent, but there was a faint chill in his heart. He didn't know that in front of the Emperor, Sir Fan Jr. had already suffered a great injury. Could he still have the power to retaliate? Although the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain was an ambush, they had faced tens of thousands of grasslands riders who were like wolves and tigers. The Qing court, or more accurately, the Qing Emperor, had put a great deal of effort into this. One secret edict removed Li Hongqing's military power. Another secret edict gave the eldest son of the Yi Manor, Yi Wan, full authority to command. As the saying goes, don't doubt the people you use and don't use the people you doubt. The Emperor's confidence, or gamble, in that young general ultimately won a complete victory. Victory required a foundation and soldiers. In order to defeat the Hu people on the grasslands, all of the soldiers in the military camps inside and outside Dingzhou had been moved out. The entire Dingzhou army had gone out. Adding on the Qingzhou army, only then did they obtain such a result. Presently, in Dingzhou, the group of soldiers Gong Dian had personally brought, as well as a small portion of the Nanzhao border soldiers Yuan had left behind, maintained order and peace. Li Hongqing silently returned to his manor and stared at the large map in a daze in his study. He then said to the guest who had been accompanying him the entire time, I am about to return to Jingdo. I will send you out of Dingzhou. As for how you will escape in the future, that will depend on your ability. The guest was silent for a moment and then said, I thank you on your behalf for your great kindness. This person was Fan Xian's trusted aide, Deng Ziyu. He was fully responsible for the matter of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Xiliang. After the upheaval in Jingdo, Deng Ziyu had become a figure the court had to capture. No one had thought that he would be so daring as to hide in the general's manor. In the Qingzhou victory, other than the Emperor's bright eyes and General Ye's godly use of troops, the Overwatch Council was also fully mobilized. Yan Bingyun has been in Dingzhou the entire time. Presumably, Jingdo doesn't know. Deng Ziyu sighed and then said, Sir Fan Jr.'s plans have all fallen into the Emperor's calculations. Now that things have come to a head, I cannot betray the interests of the Qing kingdom and go inform those who people. I trust that Sir Fan Jr. and I also have the same thoughts. Li Hongqing was silent for a moment and then said, I suddenly feel that Gong Dian's words are reasonable. No matter what Fan Xian does, in the end, he is not the Emperor's match. He is also unwilling to let the Qing people sink into a wretched situation. Since it is so, why bother? Chapter 727. In the winter of the 10th year of the Qing calendar, General Li Hongqing had won a great victory in Qingzhou. He had been summoned back to the capital. At the age of 30, he became the deputy of the Bureau of Military Affairs with incomparable glory. However, the people who sang praises of the great Qing kingdom in Jingdou could clearly see that the position of the deputy of the Bureau of Military Affairs was actually just an idle position. Under Yi Zhong's suppression, it was impossible for the heir, Li Hongqing, to be like he was in Dingzhou and have completely his own martial power. No one forgot that the previous person to ascend to the lofty position of the deputy of the Bureau of Military Affairs at such a young age was Qin Heng. That person's fate was not very glorious. After Li Hongqing returned to the capital, he immediately entered the royal palace to see the emperor. In the royal study, the emperor did not vent a glimmer of anger toward him. Instead, he only calmly talked about the scenery of Xiliang. However, the crown prince looked at Fan Ruoruo beside the emperor. His mood sank to the bottom. Leaving the royal palace, Li Hongqing went to the Bureau of Military Affairs to hand over his mission and set a date for his return. Li Hongqing returned to the manor and saw King Jing, who had just been released after being under house arrest in the royal palace, as well as his weak and pitiful sister. The family of three sat together in silence. The old prince sighed repeatedly and patted Li Hongqing's shoulder. Fortunately, nothing went wrong. You were able to last until today before returning to Jingdou. This can be considered giving the other side an explanation. Although he said this, Li Hongqing still personally went to the Fan Manor that night. He knew how high Fan Xian's hopes for him were. Although he had stubbornly resisted the emperor's edict and Gong Dian's pressure in Dingzhou and managed to drag it out for a few more days, in the end, he was still summoned back wretchedly. He had to personally give Fan Xian an explanation. No one knew the conversation between this pair of friends in the study in the back garden of the Fan Manor. Presumably, they were just expressing their apologies to each other. The palace did not seem to be very interested in this conversation because no one stopped Li Hongqing from entering the manor. I also didn't think things would develop like this. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. Standing, he hugged him and gently patted his back before seeing him out of the study. Before Li Hongqing left the study, he turned around and glanced at him worriedly. Deng Ziyuk should have escaped, but I'm afraid quite a few of your Qinian unit died on Xiliang Road. After all, this is a matter of your institute. I don't know the inside story. I hope you can control your emotions. I don't know who the traitor is. Perhaps it was just one of the 3 meetings, and the people in the council found out. After all, this time, Yan Bingyun is personally holding the fort. Facing this person, I don't have much confidence. Fan Xian's expression was a bit gloomy. But, relax. I've never been too interested in things like revenge. I just feel a bit panicked. If even you feel flustered, then I advise you to behave yourself for the time being. Li Hongqing shook his head and refused Fan Xian's intention to see him out of the manor. Like a father comforting him, he patted his shoulder forcefully, lifted his clothes, and walked out of the manor. Watching Li Hongqing's slightly lonely figure disappear from the winter garden, Fan Xian was silent for a long time before he turned his head and sat back down in the grand wooden chair in the study. Earlier, Hongqing had relayed Gong Dian's evaluation of him. That evaluation made Fan Xian involuntarily feel a touch of bitterness in his mouth. If one truly looked into it, Fan Xian's arrangements in Dongyi and Xiliang did indeed have this intention. Without a doubt, this intention could not stand on a moral level. A man should be happy with gratitude and enmity. How could he use the blood and lives of soldiers as a bargaining chip? No one could truly understand what Fan Xian was thinking. He did not want too many innocent people in the world to lose their lives because of his battle with the emperor. That was why he had chosen this arrangement. The Qingzhou victory was a perfect manifestation of the emperor's deep planning and foresight. Regardless of whether it was Hu Ji's faint attack or the chief's reaction, all of this was a foundation that the Overwatch Council, or rather, Fan Xian, had spent a great deal of energy to lay down. This foundation had been ruthlessly and calmly used by the Emperor. Fan Xian did not feel any closeness to the Hu people on the grasslands. The corpses on the fields in Shiliang Road and the burned houses would only make him clap his hands in praise of the Qingzhou victory. The problem was, this victory had easily destroyed all of Fan Xian's arrangements in Shiliang Road. If Li Hongqing still wanted to delay and not return to the capital under these circumstances, it was the same as seeking death. Fan Xian felt a deep chill and admiration for the Emperor's methods and abilities. A cowardly thought that was difficult to resist grew in his heart. You heard it all. This matter has nothing to do with me. Fan Xian pressed his hands against the desk and closed his eyes tiredly. Having returned to the central plain, Haitang Duo, who had once again put on the flowery jacket, appeared behind him. After the battle at the entrance of Hong Mountain, she had moved out at about the same time as the group in Dingzhou. Li Hongqing had returned to the capital quickly, but he was still a day later than her. Presently, the palace's surveillance of the Fan Manor had relaxed a great deal. How could they stop the northern Qi sage girl from quietly entering the manor? It had already been a year since they had seen each other. Haitang looked silently at the young man in the grand wooden armchair, thinking to herself, actually, the other person's age isn't that old. But why does he look so old and heavy now? There's a trace of exhaustion on his face that can't be brushed away. Thinking of what had happened in the Qing kingdom these days and the dead director of the Overwatch Council, Haitang suddenly understood why Fan Xian appeared so tired. Because of the words you had Hong Yiqing bring to me, many people died on the grasslands, Haitang said. Fan Xian opened his eyes and laughed coldly. I only had the court agree to Hugu sending out troops. I had not thought that the chief would take advantage of the opportunity. Haitang did not explain to him that she had once tried to suppress Su Bida's ambitions. Lightly, she said, in the end, it was still the Qing kingdom who took advantage. Fan Xian was silent. A moment later, he said, you don't need to worry about how the news got out. I sent 2 people to Shiliang Road. Hong Yiqing has still not been able to gather the people from the 4th Bureau. It is clear that Ziyu was being watched by the council during the handover. Speaking of this, he took a deep breath and suddenly thought of the young general of the Yi family mentioned in the intelligence reports. It was said that the young general had led 4,000 light riders into the grasslands to chase after the remnants of the chief's court. Fan Xian couldn't help but admire this person's courage. Thinking of the cold of winter and the fact that they were deep in the grasslands, he was afraid that these 4,000 riders would never come back alive. Those barbarians who moved from the north to the grasslands. Do they still listen to your orders? He raised his head to glance at Haitang. You are, after all, the princess of the snowy plains. You are also respected by the chief on the grasslands and have a high status. Presumably, you have some power. Haitang furrowed her brows slightly. A glimmer of anger flashed through her eyes as bright as the North Sea. Coldly, she said, at this time, you are still worried about the life and death of the 4,000 light riders. No wonder you are a powerful official of the Qing kingdom. Why don't you think of the tribes on the grasslands that have lost all of their young men and have no power to resist? I am a Qing person, then a Central Plain person, and finally a human, Fan Xian replied with his head lowered. Just as you say, Su Bida's ambitions were too great this time. He took away large numbers of young men from the various tribes. The grasslands are already empty of power. After the Qingzhou battle, the 4,000 light riders killed their way into the grasslands. As long as the snowy plains man riders left in the west of the grasslands maintain their distance, they may actually come back. She who is finished. If the time is right, the tribes you moved from the north to the grasslands may be able to take advantage of the situation and rise. Fan Xian lightly tempted Haitang. Fan Xian lightly tempted her. You must accept this reality and then make use of it. I am not like you. There are many things that I know are beneficial but do not conform to the principles in my heart, so I am unable to do them. Haitang lowered her eyelids slightly and replied in a quiet voice. However, your words right now truly surprise me. You are clearly a ruthless person who holds yourself in high regard and does not prioritize the interests of the Qin kingdom. Why do you have such a request? If I truly did not consider the interests of the Qin kingdom or even the entire world, why would I still be suffering in this manner? Regardless of whether it was to throw away hot blood or to hide from the world, I would have done it a long time ago. When did you become a saint? I am not a saint. It is just that at a certain stage in life, when the highest level of desire for power has been satisfied, I will place more emphasis on spiritual considerations. Furthermore, I do not like to be seen by others as a cold-blooded and heartless scum who only knows how to use the blood of soldiers. In the end, you are still a hypocritical and selfish person, Haitang said as she looked at him. She then placed the little knife in front of him. Fan Xian replied expressionlessly, if this counts as hypocrisy and selfishness, I think all the people in the world would thank me for being a vain person. I know your emperor is a woman, so consider it as me blackmailing you. Haitang's body shook slightly. She looked at him and didn't speak for a long time. The entire study was immersed in an oppressive atmosphere. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said with some difficulty, actually, there are many times when I need someone to help and give advice. Originally, it was Yan Bingyun and Wang Qinian who played this role. Now, Yan Bingyun has become his pure official. I have arranged for Lao Wang to leave. I have no one to ask. I am not an immortal. Facing him, I have no confidence at all. With no one to help me, I am truly helpless. Are you acting pitiful in front of me? Haitang said sarcastically but was slightly startled. She sighed and said, what do you want to ask? He then drank a mouthful of cold tea to moisten his throat. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. With a serious expression, he said, my sister is in the royal palace, my entire family is in Jingdo, and the loyal subordinates who rely on me and believe in me are in the shadow of this country. I have power, but it is difficult to shake the foundation of this court. I also don't want to shake this foundation and let the moss, ants, and rabbits basking in the sun fall to their deaths. My opponent has great power, cold rationality, and extraordinary planning ability. He has the loyalty of the vast majority of people in this land. Most importantly, although I know from the news that came out of the palace after the rain in early autumn that he gradually came down from the altar and began to become like a mortal, leaving behind some emotional emptiness, I still believe that his blood is cold enough and his heart is strong enough. Once I truly act, the people I want to protect will truly no longer exist. In the past, I was very afraid of death. Now, I am not so afraid of death. Fan Xian said a long speech and then continued to seriously conclude. But, I am very afraid that the people I love and protect will die. Can you help me resolve this problem? Haitang was not silent for long. Very straightforwardly, she said, I cannot. Fan Xian spread out his hands and let out a long sigh. Look, there is no one in this world who can help me resolve this problem. What do you mean by him coming down from the altar? Haitang was clearly very interested in this matter. She didn't know where Fan Xian's judgment of the Qin emperor came from. Fan Xian gently placed his right hand on the position of his heart and said with a not quite there smile, after all, the heart of a father and son is connected. You can't sense some small changes, but I can. He had me stay in the manner to do these things and then break them one by one for me to see. Although he demonstrated the power of an emperor, don't you think this is actually very troublesome? He had too many ways to make all of this disappear without a trace. However, he didn't do this. He was angry with me, angry with Qin Pingping, and angry with my mother. A person who originally had no meridians and was heartless has now learned to be angry. Don't you think he is becoming more and more like a normal person? Fan Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Presumably, this is also the result the old cripple wanted to cause when he went to die. But, you still have no way to change this trend. Haitang sat in the chair and lowered her head slightly. You've been sitting in Jingdo for a few months but have thrown the cause of chaos everywhere under heaven. Your thinking is actually very simple. She raised her head and stared at Fan Xian's bloodshot eyes with her bright eyes. Heavily, she said, presumably, this is also part of Qin Pingping's plan for revenge. First, he shakes the world, takes advantage of the chaos to force the emperor to abdicate, and then strikes like lightning. However, you have not obtained the Qing emperor's trust as he imagined. This is your pitiful vanity causing mischief. At the same time, you also have no way to act viciously against the world. This is your pitiful hypocrisy causing mischief. You should understand that although your personality appears sinister, in reality, in the end, you are not an ambitious and ruthless person. There are many things you cannot do. Haitang blinked slightly and put away the frightening cold light in her eyes. Calmly, she said, since it is so, there is no other word that can describe what you are doing now other than naive and childish. In the end, you still do not have the confidence to face him head-on. Fan Xian was silent for a moment and said, who would have this confidence? During these few months, I was only backing him and trying to warn him. Thus, I maintained a situation that could collapse at any moment and did my best to protect the people by my side. If it wasn't for the emperor remembering that I didn't give up and throw half of the Qing kingdom into chaos, do you think Yang Wanli, Qing Jialin, and the people in the First Bureau would have survived? He raised his head and stared at Haitang. I had to prove my strength to be able to protect these people's lives. Correct, at the final juncture, I still had to compete with the emperor face to face. I did not have that confidence, so I have been waiting for someone to come back. The blind great master. Haitang did not ask. Instead, she straightforwardly said this name that seemed to have a magical power. You cannot always place your hopes on the elders who once supported you as you grew up. Regardless of whether it is your mother, Qin Pingping, or Minister Fan, they have already done too much for you. Haitang looked at Fan Xian. A glimmer of pity suddenly rose in her heart. Have you ever thought that if the blind great master never comes back, what is the point of you tormenting yourself in Jingdo? Haitang advised Fan Xian with a serious expression. There are many things you have to do yourself. Regardless of whether you have this confidence or not, the situation has already forced you to this step. Since you cannot be indifferent to your mother and Qin Pingping's deaths, then you will never be able to play his good official and son again. Fan Xian suddenly felt these words were very piercing to the ear. He furrowed his brows and raised his hand to stop Haitang from speaking. In a low voice, he said, you have never personally experienced his power, so you can easily say the word confidence. Haitang sighed and said, but, how much longer can you wait? He did not even think about the commotion you and the emperor made in Sangzhou. Instead, he directly led his troops to the west and easily wiped out all of the hidden dangers there. Next would be Jiangnan and then Dongyi. No, perhaps he wouldn't even care about Dongyi and would directly head north. Once the situation develops to that point, all of your power will have been completely uprooted. Other than hold up in Jingdo like an idle person, watching him walk step by step toward the peak, and watching him laugh coldly at the souls of your elders, what else can you do? He can't touch Jiangnan. If he touches that place, I will have to move. Once I move, the entire Qing kingdom, including him, will feel pain. I don't know what you did in the palace treasury, but I believe that a figure like the Qing emperor would not care about any losses for the sake of the obsession in his heart, Haitang said. At this moment, a voice rang out from the shadows of the study. It was icy to the extreme. The emperor, that bastard, was never human. How could he know the feeling of pain? The person who spoke was the shadow that had floated in Jingdo like a shadow these few months. Immediately after, another direct and steady voice rang out as if it also wanted to convince Fan Xian. I don't understand much about things like self-confidence. If I really have to draw my sword, I will tell myself that I have to be confident. The person who spoke was 13th Wang, this staunch last disciple of the Sword Hut. Even when faced with the unfathomable great grandmaster, the Qing emperor, he remained calm and stubborn. Just as Fan Xian had analyzed before, the emperor's, or rather, the Qing kingdom's, greatest weakness was the lack of top-notch individual martial power. Those once powerful figures had all died one by one in the Qing kingdom's internal strife. More than half of the 9th-level aces stood in Fan Xian's camp. Even the Qing emperor did not dare to underestimate such power. If Eunuch Hong, the Qin father and son, Yan Xiaoyi, and other aces were still alive, then the Qing kingdom could truly be said to be a military camp forged from iron. Fan Xian was silent for a long time. He didn't directly reply to the persuasion of the 3 top aces in the study. Instead, he furrowed his brows and said, I don't want you all to die to his hands. Furthermore, this is, in the end, my business. In the deep winter of the 10th year of the Qing calendar, Fan Xian was like a wild beast trapped in a snowstorm. He was anxious, gloomy, and uneasy. He watched helplessly as the powerful emperor used schemes and foresight that far surpassed his own to slice off his left and right arms one by one. He watched helplessly as the Qing court methodically marched toward the achievement of unifying the land, yet he was unable to do anything. In front of the Qing emperor, Fan Xian, who had always been good at hiding himself, finally lost his confidence for the first time. He didn't know how to defeat such a powerful figure. Thus, he was waiting. He didn't know if the person he was waiting for would return. In order to ensure the safety of himself and those beside him while he waited, he was doing his best to do something. Jingdo was unexpectedly calm. According to the intelligence Baoyue brothel had painstakingly obtained, Fan Wujiu of Scholar He's Manor, once the second prince's strategist, had been injured in a surprise attack and had since disappeared. However, He Zhongwei had not been implicated in this matter. Fan Xian felt slightly disappointed. He finally understood that Hu the scholar, that old fox, was not so easy to use. What made Fan Xian feel even more defeated was that news finally came from Jiangnan. It was not good news. The transmission of information in this era was always slow, so slow that it made one angry. The news Fan Xian received in December was, in reality, something from a month ago. The Palace Treasury Transport Company had received a secret edict from the palace. According to the plan, they had begun the preparations for the opening of the treasury bidding next spring. However, this year, the bidding process of the palace treasury had undergone a shocking change. It had changed the bidding of preparing silver to the bidding of the court's evaluation report. This change directly changed the palace treasury's authority to invite merchants from the court and the merchants to completely become the court's arrangement. In other words, when the palace treasury bidding opened next year, whoever the court wanted to win the bid would win. Thus, even if the Ming family led by Xia Qifei had the secret support of Zhaoshang Money House and Taiping Money House, they might not be able to continue their past glory. This was, without question, a heavy blow to Fan Xian's power. The rules of the palace treasury bidding had been fixed ever since the 3 large workshops were built. Regardless of whether it was the old Yi family or the later palace treasury, no one dared to lightly change this rule. The change this winter was, without question, a humiliating setback. Everyone knew that the emperor's edict would have an inestimable adverse effect on all of Jiangnan's commercial activities. Unexpectedly, the Jiangnan merchants did not band together to resist this muddle-headed edict. On the contrary, the Lingnan Xiong family and Chuanzhou Sun family maintained their silence. A few salt merchants began to itch to try. As everyone knew, a number of the disciples of those salt merchants had died to serve Fan Jr.'s hands during the spring examinations. Chapter 728. It was not easy to live in Jiangnan. How deep was the snow in Jiangnan? The repeated secret edicts of the Qing court threw all of Jiangnan into chaos. The snow, which was not heavy, added an endless chill to the tens of thousands of common people. All of the large merchants felt the pressure and murderous aura coming from Jingdou. The Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Chuanzhou had always been on good terms with the Fan family. Under the pressure of the court, they did not dare move. As for the salt merchants who had always been under the protection of the court nobility and had been stealing the wealth of the world from the side, they began to grow restless. The change in the way the palace treasury invited business had fundamentally attacked the power Fan Xian possessed. Everyone could see this clearly, particularly Xia Qifei, as Fan Xian's representative in Jiangnan and the current head of the Ming family. He felt the imminent danger. Given the Ming family's influence in Jiangnan and, most importantly, the survival of the Ming family would affect the lives of the people in Jiangnan. It would make the court have some fear when they acted. At least, they would not directly force the Ming family to death in the 11th year of the Qing calendar. If the Ming family truly fell apart, the court would not receive any benefits. However, this trend was already set. If the situation continued to develop like this, in a few years, the Ming family would gradually be marginalized and gradually swallowed up by the other dozen or so Jiangnan merchants supported by the court. Behind Xia Qifei were the lives of tens of thousands of people. He had no choice but to be cautious and prudent. Furthermore, the long conversation that night with the Jiangnan governor, Shui Qing, made it clear what the court wanted of him. After that night, Xia Qifei sank into deep thought. He had to choose between Sir Fan Jr. and the court. It was because of this vexing thought that after he received the Qinian unit's notice, he did not choose to immediately sneak into Jingdou to meet with Fan Xian. It was not that he had begun to waver. Rather, he knew that Fan Xian had asked him to enter the capital to assess his loyalty. The present situation did not give Xia Qifei the time to demonstrate his loyalty. The situation in Jiangnan was too dangerous, so he only wrote a personally written letter to Fan Xian to express his loyalty as always. If it had been any other merchant, it would not have been a difficult matter to choose between the court and the already powerless Fan Xian. Merchants pursued profit. They themselves did not have the true power to influence the situation. They had to voluntarily or be forced to lean toward the more powerful side. This was the natural nature of merchants. Even if Xia Qifei abandoned Fan Xian and left, presumably, it would not be surprising or shameful to many people. However, Xia Qifei was not a normal merchant. This was also the reason Fan Xian had chosen him to be his representative in Jiangnan. This illegitimate child of the Ming family had a very similar life path to Fan Xian. He had wandered the Jianghu since he was young and was the leader of the Jiangnan water bandits. Other than the natural bloodline of a merchant, he also had some of the spirit of loyalty of the Jianghu people. Xia Qifei knew that without Sir Fan, he would not be able to return. Was Fan Jr. would not be able to Fan. Of the Ming, of Ming, he return, he, and Ming, he, Fan, he, and he. The Ming family had operated in Jiangnan for countless years. Even when Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan in the past, it had been difficult. Now, under Xia Qifei's lead, they began to launch a resistance against the pressure of the Jiangnan governor's yamen and the secret edict from Jingdou. For a moment, all of Jiangnan fell into chaos. The Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, who had worked well with Fan Xian in the past but did not show much of himself, stood up. This high-ranking border official in the Qing court coldly began to suppress the Ming family. Furthermore, he, unexpectedly, once again helped the fourth master of the Ming family onto the stage. This was a move Fan Xian had used in the past. Now, Xue Qing simply copied it and obtained very good results. The Ming garden had always been divided into a few factions. Although the old Ming family did not have a lot of shares in their hands, they were, after all, people within the Ming family. Now that the differences between the two sides had been put on the table, it was clearly difficult for Xia Qifei to continue protecting Fan Xian's interests in Jiangnan. However, Xia Qifei still persisted. With the great support of Zhaoshang Money House, he turned money into power and permeated the entire Jiangnan officialdom from bottom to top. He did not care about the true implementation of the court's edict. The head of the Ming family knew that the general trend could not be stopped. Sir Fan Jr. was just waiting for something in Jingdou. What they needed to do was to do their best to preserve his power and allow his wait in Jingdou to continue. The problem was, how long would they have to wait? How long would they have to endure with their lives on the line before they reached the end? They did not endure for long. It was clear that the Qing court had lost patience with the Jiangnan aristocrats and merchants' lack of cooperation. On the third day after the end of Winter Tea Party the Palace Treasury Transport Company held, the head of the Ming family, Xia Qifei, who had sternly opposed the new rules of the Palace Treasury bidding, was assassinated outside Suzhou. There were more than 500 black-clothed people assassinating Xia Qifei. No one knew how these killers had passed through the Qing kingdom's strict internal defenses and arrived outside Suzhou. They also didn't know where these ruthless and military-like killers had come from. Why had the Suzhou government and the Jiangnan governor's manor reacted so slowly when Xia Qifei was assassinated? There were tens of thousands of provincial soldiers on Jiangnan Road. Why had not a single killer been caught after the incident? The 500 black-clothed killers swallowed Xia Qifei's group of carriages like a tide. Although Xia Qifei was the master of the Jiangnan water bandits and had countless brave men willing to risk their lives for him, in the face of such an unexpected surprise attack, he threw away all his heads and spilled all his blood. In the end, his defensive perimeter was broken through. The Jiangnan water bandits' new director died in battle. Guan Lumei, who had returned to Suzhou to help take care of affairs, also died in this assassination. Xia Qifei originally had no chance of survival. However, at this critical moment, an unremarkable Ming family servant carried the heavily injured Xia Qifei on his back. Relying on a cold sword in his hand, he killed his way out of the heavy encirclement and carried Xia Qifei back to the Ming family. The Ming garden was sealed and not opened for 3 days. When the provincial soldiers arrived at the scene of the assassination, other than the bodies of the Ming family servants and guards lying on the ground, they didn't find anything. The black-clothed killers didn't even leave a single body behind. That night, in the Jiangnan governor's manor, Governor Xue Qing and the 2 advisors looked at the intelligence report in their hands and began to think deeply. The court disregarded the shock of the world and still wanted to brazenly attack. It was already staking everything on one throw. In Jingdou, the emperor no longer wanted to play these empty games with Fan Xian and had already lost his patience. However, Xia Qifei had survived such a thunderous attack. This reality made Xue Qing feel slightly disappointed. Presently, the Ming garden had been sealed. The court could not openly break into the Jiangnan Ming family's garden. In the intelligence report, the swordsman who had carried Xia Qifei far away on his back had attracted Xue Qing's attention. To be able to break out of the encirclement when faced with hundreds of Qing elite soldiers, a martial artist with such ability had to be a 9th level ace. There were not many 9th level aces in the world. To be able to remain hidden by Xia Qifei's side and turn the tide in the end, it could only be a disciple of the sword hut that Fan Xian had sent. The Jiangnan matter did not end there. In this bloody storm, the assassination of the master of the Ming family was only a prelude. After the Ming family closed the garden, the headquarters of the Jiangnan water bandits in Shazhou began to mobilize their aces in preparation to rush to Suzhou. However, this group of reinforcements had only traveled halfway when they were stopped and disarmed by the provincial soldiers of the court. The Jiangnan Navy stationed in Shazhou took advantage of the emptiness of the Jiangnan water bandits to carry out the cruelest purge. The Jiangnan water bandits surrounded by the lake were burned by a big fire. No one knew how many people died. The fire burned for 3 days and 3 nights and did not stop. It burned the lake dry and burned the reeds into long incense sticks for sacrifice. There could be countless reasons for the court to purge the Jiangnan water bandits. However, what disappointed Shui Qing was that the Jiangnan Navy was too ruthless. The group of water bandits they had stopped along the way were either dead or injured. The captives were also very stubborn. Not a single person was willing to open their mouth. Thus, his attempt to link the Ming family to the Jiangnan water bandits was forced to a halt. On the 3rd day of the Ming Gardens closure, the 4th young master of the Ming family died in the well. It was said that he felt guilty and jumped into the well to commit suicide. Immediately after, the people of the older faction of the Ming family began to gradually wither away. Xia Qifei, who had lost too many of his family and brothers, began a cruel counterattack. At least for now, the Ming Garden had finally stabilized under his bloody methods and the help of the Dongyi warriors. The effect of the court using such methods to deal with the Jiangnan giant merchant, the Ming family, was too bad. It could easily cause unrest among the people in Jiangnan and cause the other merchants to develop a sense of distrust toward the court. Furthermore, it should not be forgotten that Xia Qifei now also had the status of an official. His position as the Jiangnan supervisor of the Overwatch Council had not been removed, so the governor's manor would not admit that this matter had anything to do with the government. Under the Ming family's angry accusations and the Jingdou Overwatch Council headquarters questioning, with the Jiangnan governor's yamen as the leader, the governments of a few large provinces began to band together and diligently launch an investigation into the assassination of Xia Qifei. Of course, everyone could imagine that this investigation would never have any results. Strangely, no one, whether it was the government or the Ming family, brought up the Jiangnan water bandits that had disappeared in a sea of fire. It was as if the once glorious Jianghu power in Jiangnan had never existed. Compared to the inexplicable battle outside Cangzhou and the great victory at the mouth of Hong Mountain that decided the direction of history, the turmoil and killing in Jiangnan were not so eye-catching. The number of people who died was not as many as those 2 places, and the impact did not appear to be as large as those 2 places. The nobles and citizens of Jingdou only vaguely knew that there was a very rich family in Jiangnan that did not seem to be doing very well recently. However, the contest in Jiangnan was actually the true contest because it bore the largest portion of the Qing kingdom's tax revenue and 1/3 of the people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Furthermore, Jiangnan had always been peaceful. Even when Fan Xian had gone down to Jiangnan and caused chaos, he had carefully controlled the disturbance within a certain range. Although he had provoked a movement of Jiangnan scholars into the streets, he had not caused Jiangnan to fall into chaos. This time, Jiangnan had truly fallen into chaos. If Xia Qifei had not luckily survived and used even more ruthless methods to soothe his sorrowful heart, perhaps Jiangnan would have already completely fallen into the court's control. Regarding this, it could only be said that Fan Xian's luck in this life was indeed good. The trust he had placed in his trusted subordinates had completely exceeded the returns. The Cold War between the Emperor and Fan Xian became a hot battle in 3 important places. Other than these 3 places, something else happened outside Yingzhou. However, this matter did not attract too much attention. Su Wenmao, an official of the Overwatch Council and the head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company who had been stripped of his official position by the court and escorted back to Jingdou for trial, passed through Yingzhou. When the group of prisoner carriages had just left Yingzhou, they were attacked by a group of mountain bandits. That day, countless officials of the Ministry of Justice responsible for escorting the criminal officials were killed or injured. Su Wenmao had one of his arms chopped off. In the end, whether he was alive or dead was unknown. Back then, the Yingzhou mountain bandit was actually Guan Wumei, right? That year, I took a boat down to Jiangnan. The first group I came into contact with was her. Then, through her connections, I found the 7th young master of the Ming dynasty, Xia Qifei. On the 28th of the 12th month of the 10th year of the Qin calendar, Jiangnan's intelligence finally arrived at the Fan Manor through Baoyue brothel. Fan Xian looked at the intelligence report in his hand and was silent for a moment. He then said, the Jiangnan water bandits had long been secretly recruited. The focus of the Hangzhou conference has always been in Yingzhou. The tragic scene after the river burst its banks has long disappeared. The present Yingzhou Zhizhou is a good official I personally picked. How could there be so many mountain bandits again? Fan Xian smiled, but his smile was slightly desolate. He turned his head to glance at Lin Wan-er and said, you and I have struggled for so many years, but it still can't compare to the Emperor's unreasonable and blind killing. When Fan Xian had come down to Jiangnan, he had passed by Yingzhou and found that the people's livelihood was difficult. Later, the palace treasury was rejuvenated. The court's national treasury was filled, and the palace treasury was plentiful. At the first moment, the Hangzhou conference that Lin Wan hosted began to throw silver into the poorer provinces on both sides of the Yangtze River. At that time, there was Fan Xian and Princess Chen's reputation holding the line. There was also the Overwatch Council's sinister surveillance, so there were no officials who dared to take silver from it. The people's livelihood in Jiangnan should be better than before. The Sword Hut sent a total of 6 people down to Jiangnan. I left 3 in the palace treasury because that is the most important place. The other 3 are mainly responsible for Xia Qifei and Su Wenmao's safety. I don't want these people following me to all die, Fan Xian said expressionlessly. Even so, such a big problem still occurred. I hope Wenmao will be able to survive. Lin Wan-er watched him quietly from the side. She knew that there was a lot of pain and pressure in his heart. Fan Xian lowered his head and thought deeply for a moment. He then slowly raised his head. A flame seemed to begin to burn in his eyes. This flame was very much like the fire that had burned in the lake for 3 days and 3 nights. It was as if countless wronged souls were struggling, wailing, crying, and howling in this fire. The situation in Jingdou was also full of bitter wind and rain. Yan Bingyun was still in Dingzhou dealing with the matters of the Qingzhou battle. Even though he had already left Dingzhou, he still had to spend some time on the road. It was during this time that the Imperial Censorate took the opportunity to begin its pressure on the Overwatch Council. Of the 2 directors of the Overwatch Council, one was dead and the other was crippled. Yan Bingyun was unable to obtain the Overwatch Council's heartfelt obedience. A group of dragons was without a leader. Relying on the Emperor's indulgence and the cooperation of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, the Imperial Censorate began a cruel purge of the Overwatch Council under He Zhongwei's lead. The first to bear the brunt was the First Bureau. In just 3 days, over 30 Overwatch Council officials had been arrested and thrown into the Supreme Court. It was rare for the seemingly gentle civil officials to have a chance to act against the Overwatch Council. They would not be polite. The various torture devices in the prison all began to take effect. Defeated. Fan Xian had lost. He lost again and again until he was utterly defeated. Fan Xian knew he was wrong. The emperor was like Dong Mountain. Even if he created countless storms under heaven, as long as this mountain did not fall, the Qing court would not fall into chaos. No matter how big the storm, it would still be cold. The secret news that came from the heavenly palace was like the last straw that pressed down on Fan Xian's heart, forcing him to immediately make a choice. A beauty that had been chosen to enter the palace was said to be pregnant with a dragon seed. Hearing this news, Fan Xian couldn't help but smile coldly. It looked like the celery's demon-killing effect was indeed not very effective against a monster like a great grandmaster. Xia Qifei is having a difficult time in Jiangnan. If I still don't act, he won't even be able to protect himself, much less support me. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly. The more of my power I lose, the more ruthless the emperor's methods will be. This is a matter that complements each other. At the beginning, he will come slowly, but my counterattack power will become smaller and smaller. His worries will also become less and less, and his methods will become more and more crazy until he finally turns me into a loner. The court's actions in Jiangnan are actually very unwise, Lin Wan said in a quiet voice. Anyone with eyes knows what the Ming family's predicament is. The court's actions this time are too obvious, and the methods they use are too bloody. I'm afraid the Jiangnan merchants will be at odds with each other from now on. Not only is it unwise, it can even be called stupid. However, it is very clear that the emperor does not care about this. He only cares about using the shortest amount of time to completely destroy me and shatter any hope I have. Fan Xian's expression was wooden. For some reason, it seems that he is also somewhat anxious. Lin Wan looked at him. Her heart trembled slightly. Although the husband and wife did not say anything explicitly, she only needed one look to know what he was thinking in his heart. Particularly under such circumstances, his expression was enough to prove his thoughts. Just like this, two clear streams of tears flowed out from Wan Er's eyes. She stared at Fan Xian in a daze and said in a trembling voice, "But, what can you do?" Fan Xian was silent for a long time. He then gently pulled her into his arms and held her as gently as if he was holding a child. In a quiet voice, he said, "Although I have lost again and again and appear to have no power to retaliate, it actually proves something that I really want to know. The emperor is, in the end, old. He is no longer as patient as he was in the past. He is steady and cold to a frightening degree and doesn't give people any chances." Fan Xian lowered his head and said by his wife's ear. Fan Xian lowered his head and said by his wife's ear, "After taking off that dragon robe, the emperor is more like a normal person. Perhaps this is my opportunity." Time changed. Fan Xian did not have time to wait for the black-shrouded relative to return from the world of ice and snow. If he truly continued to wait like this, even if the emperor continued to resist killing him, even if he waited until Uncle Wu Zhu returned, at that time, everyone he cared about would probably all die, just like the people in the Jiangnan water bandits, Guan Wumei, Su Wenmao, and the officials in the Overwatch Council. He had to counterattack. Furthermore, he did indeed have a secret in his hands that even the emperor did not know about. However, he knew that once the counterattack regarding the palace treasury truly began, there would be no turning back between Fan Xian's faction and the person in the royal palace. Perhaps the entire Qing kingdom would sink into chaos because of this. If Fan Xian lost, countless people behind him would probably die. Fan Xian did not have the confidence to defeat his emperor. When he bravely stood out with his life as the price, he had to leave a path of retreat for the family and friends he cared about. After that autumn rain, he no longer cared about his own life and death, but he still cared about the life and death of others. Because of this path of retreat, the Fan Manor was quiet for a long time after the 28th of the 12th lunar month. The atmosphere was oppressive for a long time. Even the two little children seemed to have noticed their father's strange emotions and no longer dared to make a loud noise. Because of this path of retreat, the Fan Manor was quiet for a long time after the 28th of the 12th lunar month. The atmosphere was oppressive for a long time. Even the two little children seemed to have noticed their father's strange emotions and didn't make any loud noises. After a very tasteless new year, Fan Xian casually ate some dumplings and shut himself in the study. He shut himself in for 7 days. It was not until the 7th that he came out of the study. Everyone in the manor was waiting outside the study. Lin Wan stood to the side and looked at him worriedly. Cici brought a bowl of ginseng soup to his hands. Cici's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly felt an ominous premonition, but she bit her lips tightly and did not make a sound. She believed that the young master she had watched grow up was not a mortal. No matter what kind of predicament he faced, he would easily solve it, just like he had in the past 20 years. On the 7th day of the new year, classes began at the Imperial College. After washing up, Lin Wanner helped him tidy up his clothes and sent him to the main entrance of the mansion. On the way there, her hands trembled slightly. The morning sunlight broke through the cold clouds that had sealed the capital for a long time and shone down coldly. Lin Wanner stared at Fan Xian's handsome cheek in a daze. She didn't know if she would ever see it again. Suddenly, she saw a strand of white hair on Fan Xian's temple, shining in the morning light. She couldn't help but feel her heart wrench in pain. She tried her best to remain calm as she asked, "Have you figured anything out after thinking for 7 days?" Fan Xian sighed and recovered the laziness and helplessness he had when he first entered Jingdo. He smiled and said, "Thinking for 7 days, hoping to become a great grandmaster. Don't you think I'm being too delusional?" Lin Wanner covered her mouth and laughed. "What wishful thinking. There has been a reply to the message I asked Eunuch Dai to deliver to the palace before the new year. His Majesty has asked me to enter the palace in the afternoon." Fan Xian glanced at his wife with pity. "His Majesty has always loved you. Adding to the fact that he is old, I don't think he will make things difficult for you. If you are not comfortable in Jingdo, go back to Danzhou. His Majesty has to give grandmother some face." Lin Wanner continued to cover her mouth and asked with a smile, "I'm too lazy to leave. I'll wait for you at home." "But have you really thought of something?" Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders and said like a ruffian, "What idea?" "His Majesty doesn't have any openings on his body." "Ah, I remember. A man surnamed Xiong once said that since he doesn't have openings on his body, then he is openings." "You're joking again." Lin Wanner covered her mouth and laughed until she was about to cough out tears. "I was joking anyway." Fan Xian lowered his head and gently kissed Wanner on the forehead. He then climbed into the carriage without turning his head. Watching the carriage head in the direction of Dongchuan Road and the Imperial College, the smile on Lin Wanner's face immediately turned into desolation. She lowered the sleeve she had covered her mouth with. There were 2 spots of blood on the white sleeve. These 7 days had been difficult for her. Her old illness had relapsed, and she was very sad. Confucius said to become righteous. Mencius said to take righteousness. Only when righteousness is done, then benevolence is at its peak. Reading the books of the saints, what have you learned? I have no regrets. Since ancient times, those with lofty ideals who believed in righteousness under heaven should not be moved by success or failure. A voice, so calm and even slightly cold, rang out in front of the little lake in the Imperial College. More than 100 students of the Imperial College listened quietly to Sir Fan Jr.'s lesson. Many people felt that Sir Fan Jr.'s mood was strange. He seemed to like to joke mischievously, but those mischievous jokes were not very funny. Many people felt that Sir Fan Jr. had something on his mind. Who the scholar watched this scene quietly from under a large tree. His old heart was comforted. He thought he knew what Fan Xian was worried about, so he was comforted. It was the 7th day of the new year, the first class of the Imperial College. In the afternoon, the emperor would summon Fan Xian into the palace. The upper echelons of the Qing court all knew that it was Fan Xian who had invited them into the palace this time. Naturally, who the scholar thought that under the emperor's repeated blows and in front of the great battle results the Qing kingdom had achieved, Fan Xian had admitted defeat. Thinking of the Qing kingdom ruler and officials being of one mind, father and son of one mind, unifying the world and living in harmony, who the scholar felt incomparably comforted. He didn't even pay attention to the specific contents of Fan Xian's lesson. Kong is not Jiu Kong pretending to be Wang Li Hong. It is not Kong Ming waving a fan, and it is even less likely to mean eye-catching. Mencius, I don't really like this person because he likes to argue too much. He is similar to me. Fan Xian smiled as he lectured to the 100 Imperial College students by the lake. He didn't care whether or not these students could understand. There were indeed collections of classics and history in this world, but there were no Confucius, Mencius, or many other philosophers. There were theories of benevolence and righteousness, but very few were as clear as what Confucius said. Such a thing as risking one's life for righteousness must occasionally be done, but I am not that kind of person. I have always been afraid of death. After these words were said, all of the Imperial College students laughed. They felt that in Sir Fan Jr.'s messy lecture, a joke that they could understand had finally appeared. But Fan Xian's expression suddenly became cold. After waiting for the surroundings to quiet down, he said, word by word, how many people are different from animals? Is it only those who value righteousness? Not necessarily. A person's instinct is to seek life and avoid death. However, a person is worthy of respect and they can bravely meet death. Why meet death? Naturally, it is because there are things in this world that are more important than life and death. This still has nothing to do with me. He smiled. Then, there was silence all around. Everyone felt that something was strange. All of the Imperial College students stared in a daze at him by the lake. No one laughed out loud. I had always thought that there was nothing in this world more important than one's own life and death. Later, I discovered that a person's desire is an extraordinary thing. A person having the right to choose is an extraordinary thing. Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then said, since we are going to die, then we have to choose a way for us to die to our heart's content. Although the phrase, no regrets, is a bit vulgar, in the end, it is still a very practical thing. How should a person live their life? Fan Xian looked around and asked this question. Naturally, no one answered. After a moment of silence, his voice reverberated through the quiet Imperial College. I've thought about this question my entire life and still haven't understood it. Copying many books, earning a lot of money, marrying many wives, having many children, I seem to have done it all. Then, I thought about it for a long time and came to a general conclusion. It is to live however I want, as long as I live with a clear conscience. This is roughly what I want to say today. After saying this, Fan Xian left the Imperial College and sat in the lonely black carriage, leaving behind a group of confused and baffled young Imperial College students looking at each other, as well as the scholar, whose expression had changed dramatically after he finally understood what Fan Xian was saying. The scholar left the Imperial College in fear and hurried in the direction of the royal palace. It was still early. Fan Xian would only be able to enter the palace in the afternoon. He hoped he still had time to say something to the emperor, advise him, and prevent something from happening. Fan Xian's rambling speech in the Imperial College spread out in the shortest amount of time. There was no need for people with intentions to add fuel to the fire. In reality, all of Jingdo, those sensitive people had been waiting for this Jingdo idler's reaction. In contrast to all of these people's hurried nervousness, Fan Xian was very calm. There was still some time before he entered the palace. He arrived at Xinfeng restaurant and began to enjoy the rare, perhaps last, enjoyment of the winter, a few steaming baskets of jitang buns, as well as Dabao, who had a bun face on the side of the table. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.